Hey guys, tonight we are going on a journey not just through time, but through metallurgy, myth, and a little bit of what feels like ancient magic. We are going to explore the lost art of making true Damascus steel, a legendary metal so strong and sharp that it was said to be able to cut through a feather as it fell through the air. You're about to become an apprentice in a craft so secret, you'd probably get a stern talking to, or worse, just for asking too many questions. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, in the comments below, let me know what city you're listening from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where our little community is scattered across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air around you is thick, a heavy blanket woven from 100 different scents. There's a sharp, sweet smell of dates piled high, the earthy aroma of raw wool, the distant, tantalizing fragrance of roasting meat, and a constant, dusty perfume of spices that have traveled thousands of miles to be here. You are in a marketplace, but not just any marketplace. This is a crossroads of the world, a place where a dozen languages tumble over each other in a chaotic, yet harmonious symphony. Men with sun-weathered faces and eyes that have seen the vastness of the desert haggle over bolts of silk from the farthest reaches of Cathay. Women with jingling silver bracelets on their arms carefully inspect clay pots painted with intricate geometric designs. You are a traveler, a soul drawn to the hum of the world, and you've seen your fair share of wonders. But you're about to hear something that will change the direction of your journey. It starts as a murmur, a snippet of conversation you catch by accident. You're idly tracing the pattern on a worn Persian rug when you overhear two men nearby. They aren't speaking to you, they're deep in their own world. One is a soldier, his leather armor scarred and supple from years of use. The other is a merchant, softer, but with a shrewdness in his gaze that suggests sage he has won his own kind of battles. The soldier is boasting, but not about a battle. H.E.S. talking about his blade. A lesser sword, he says with a dismissive wave of his hand, would have chipped on his helmet. Mine simply sang through it. The merchant nods, a knowing, almost reverent look on his face. One of the true blades, he whispers, his voice low and conspiratorial. From the old workshops. Does it have the jawhar? The soldier grins and draws his weapon just an inch from its scabbard. It's not the glint of polished metal that catches your eye, but something else entirely. In the sliver of light, you see a surface that doesn't just reflect, it seems to live. It's covered in a mesmerizing, swirling pattern like smoke trapped beneath a layer of glass, or the pattern's oil makes on water. This is your first time hearing about the legend. The merchant begins to tell a story, and you find yourself leaning in, forgetting the rug entirely. He speaks of blades that are forged, not just made. Blades that can be bent into a circle and spring back perfectly straight. Blades so impossibly sharp, he swears on his grandfather's honor, that if you were to drop a silk scarf onto the edge, it would fall to the floor into separate pieces. This is the mainstream historical knowledge, the legend that has echoed through the centuries, the unparalleled sharpness and resilience of Damascus steel. You are, of course, skeptical. It sounds like a tall tale, a story polished and embellished with every telling, just like the pebbles in a riverbed. But the soldier's quiet pride and the merchant's genuine feel different from the usual marketplace bravado. They call it Damascus steel, the merchant continues, because our great city is where the world comes to find it. But a wise man knows the secret isn't in the dust of our streets. He leans closer. The magic begins in a faraway land. Damascus is the showroom, not the forge. This is a fascinating little tidbit, a piece of obscure trivia that complicates the name. The steel wasn't always made here, but the city was its most famous point of trade with the West, the brand name that stuck in the minds of crusaders and kings. As you stand there listening, you ponder the name itself. Damascus. Does it refer to this bustling, ancient city? Or perhaps, as some storytellers claim, to a legendary smith named Damascus who perfected the art? Or is the name itself a description? You've seen damask fabric, with its own intricate woven patterns. The Arabic word damas can mean watered, and looking at that sliver of the blade, you can see why. It looks exactly like watered silk. It's a question that perplexes you, and it's a detail that, unbeknownst to you, historians centuries in the future will still be debating. The soldier sheathes his weapon with a soft, final shake. The conversation shifts to prices, to caravan routes, to the politics of the day. But for you, the world has tilted on its axis. The noise of the market fades into a dull roar. The scent of spices no longer interests you. You have heard of something that is at once a peerless weapon, a work of high art, and a profound mystery, a legend you can hold in your hand. The sun begins its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The merchants pack up their wares. The day is ending, but a new quest is just beginning in your mind. You have to see more. You have to understand. What is this strange, beautiful, impossible metal? The marketplace empties out, the cacophony of the day softening into the quiet footsteps of the last few stragglers. The air cools, but you don't leave. The image of that blade is seared into your mind's eye, that impossible, liquid pattern. It was just a weapon, it was a piece of frozen art, a mystery captured in steel. For days, it's all you can think about. You start asking questions discreetly at first. You approach other soldiers, merchants, and metalworkers in the sprawling city. Most just shrug, giving you the same legends you've already heard. Yes, the blades are the finest in the world. No, they don't know how they are made. Yes, they cost a king's ransom. Finally, a grizzled old blacksmith, his face a roadmap of certain wrinkles, points you in a specific direction. He tells you of an old, secluded part of the city, a courtyard where dealers of rare antiquities and jewels conduct their business. They don't hawk their wares in the open. You must be invited. You must have a serious purpose. Your obsession, it seems, is your invitation. After a few more days of careful inquiries, you find yourself standing before a heavy, dark wood door, intricately carved with geometric patterns. You knock. The door opens a crack, and a pair of suspicious eyes peer out. You explain your purpose, not to buy but to understand. You speak of the soldier's blade, of the watery pattern of the stories. Something in your earnestness, your pure curiosity, seems to. The door swings open. You are led into a quiet, lamplit room. The air smells of old paper, cedarwood, and oiled metal. A man with a neatly trimmed gray beard and wearing a fine silk robes, it's behind a low table. He gestures for you to sit, pouring you a small cup of heavily spiced tea. He listens to your story patiently, his fingers steep lead before him. When you finish, he is silent for a long moment. Then, without a word, he rises and walks to a large, ornate chest in the corner of the room. He opens it, and you can see it's lined with plush, dark velvet. He reaches in with both hands and lifts something out, carrying it with a reverence you've only ever seen priests give to holy relics. He lays it on a cloth on the table between you. It's a dagger. The scabbard is simple, worn leather and silver, but he slowly draws the blade, and your breath catches in your throat. This is no mere sliver of a glimpse. The entire blade is laid bare under the warm, flickering lamplight. And the pattern is everything. This is the mainstream knowledge, the single most identifiable feature of this legendary metal. The surface is a chaotic masterpiece of shimmering, swirling lines. It looks like the grain of a rare, exotic wood, or the complex eddies of a river flowing over dark stones. The dealer sees your awe. The jawhar, he says, his voice barely a whisper. The essence, the jewel, you are allowed to pick it up. The dagger has surprising weight, a dense, solid feel that speaks of its quality. It feels perfectly balanced, an extension of your hand, but your eyes are glued to the surface. You run your thumb gently over the pattern, expecting to feel ridges, some texture from the design. But there's nothing. The surface is perfectly impossibly smooth. And here you encounter a fascinating, less-known fact. This pattern isn't on the steel. It is the steel. It's not a superficial treatment applied at the end, like an engraving or an acid etch you might see on lesser blades. The dealer explains that if you were to snap this blade into an act of sacrilege, he assures you, you would find the exact same pattern running through the cross-section of the metal. It is the steel's very soul made visible, a fingerprint of its creation. He points to a specific part of the blade with a slender finger. You see this, how the lines are tight and dense, like 1,000 tiny threads. We call this a rose pattern. And on other blades, you might find patterns that look like a ladder, with straight lines running across the blade. We call that one Mohammed's ladder. Some smiths believe different patterns give the blade different strengths, different personalities. This is another piece of niche trivia. The connoisseurs and users of these blades categorized and named the patterns, attributing specific qualities to them, much like wine lovers describe the notes in a vintage. But this is where a subtle debate, one that will last for centuries, begins to form in your mind. Is the pattern truly linked to the blade's function? Does a ladder pattern genuinely make a sword better at parrying, as some warriors claim? Or is the pursuit of the specific, complex patterns purely a matter of aesthetics, a way for a master smith to show off their unparalleled skill? The dealer himself seems unsure. The old masters believed the jawhar was a map of the blade's strength, he says thoughtfully. A flawless pattern meant a flawless blade. But, he trails off, is it the cause of the strength, or just a beautiful symptom of it? Only the men who forged it truly knew. It's a classic chicken and egg problem, a question that historians and modern metallurgists will continue to argue over. Was form following function, or was the ultimate function to create a breathtaking form? You carefully place the dagger back on the cloth, your mind reeling. You came here seeking an answer, but you've only found a deeper, more beautiful question. The pattern isn't just a decoration, it's a visible clue to a hidden, microscopic structure that gives the steel its legendary properties. It's a language, and you are illiterate. You ask the dealer the inevitable question, what would a blade like this cost? He smiles a little sadly. It is not for sale, but if it were, you would need the purse of a sultan. This is not a tool for a common soldier. This is a treasure for a king's collection. His words hang in the air, shifting your perspective once again. You had thought of this steel as a marvel of warfare, a true love-unmatched performance. But now you understand. It is also a symbol of ultimate power and wealth, a luxury so profound that only the highest echelons of society could ever hope to possess it. The secret of its creation is not just a trade secret, it's the key to a treasure chest. The dealer gently wraps the dagger in its cloth and places it back in the velvet-lined chest, the click of the lock echoing in the quiet room. He can see the gears turning in your mind. They are mixing with a new kind of calculation. His words about the price, about sultans and kings, have opened a new door in your understanding. This isn't just about a sharp piece of metal. It's about status. You start to look around his small, exclusive shop with new eyes. You see a jeweled box from Persia, a roll of silk so fine it seems to float on the air, a set of ivory game pieces. These are all objects of immense value, items that define a person's place in the world, and you realize the Damascus blade belongs among them. It's a luxury good, the ultimate accessory for the ancient world's 1%. This is the next layer of the story, a crucial piece of mainstream history. While the performance of Damascus steel was legendary, its value was amplified by its rarity and beauty. Owning a Damascus blade was like owning a masterpiece painting or a rare jewel today. It was a conspicuous display of wealth and power. You wouldn't just show up to a royal court with any old sword strapped to your hip. If you were a person of consequence, like a general, a vizier, or a prince, you carried a blade with a mesmerizing jawhar. Its pattern a silent testament to the fact that you could afford the very best. It was an object that said, I am a person who commands resources, who has access to the finest and most secret crafts in the world. The dealer pours you another cup of the sweet, strong tea. He seems to enjoy your dawning comprehension. You see, he says, a king does not just buy a blade. He commissions it. He might wait years. He will send messengers to the most renowned smiths with specific requests. I want a sword that feels as light as a willow branch but can cleave a shield into. And I want the pattern to resemble the shifting sands of the desert at dawn. You imagine the scene, a powerful ruler, surrounded by opulence, not just buying a product but patronizing an art form. The smiths who could create these blades were not mere laborers, they were celebrated artists. Their names whispered with the same reverence as poets and architects. Their workshops were jealously guarded, and their patrons would pay handsomely to ensure their exclusive services. This leads you to a more peculiar, and slightly amusing piece of information. The dealer shares a story about a notoriously vain emir who was obsessed with his collection of Damascus daggers. He didn't just collect them for their martial prowess, he used them for mundane tasks, simply to flaunt them. The story goes that he would use a different dagger each day to slice his morning melon. His attendants lived in fear not of the emir's temper, but of the possibility of accidentally dropping or dulling one of the priceless blades. It's a comical image, a powerful man using a weapon capable of slicing through armor to cut up breakfast fruit, but it perfectly illustrates the point. The blade's primary function in that context wasn't to be a weapon, but to be an object of obscene luxury. You ask the dealer if all the blades were made for royalty. He shakes his head. No, of course not. The highest quality pieces, the full-watered blades with the most complex patterns, those were for the elite. But there were different grades. A skilled soldier or wealthy merchant might afford a simpler blade, one with a less dramatic but still present pattern. Think of it like fabrics. There is the king's silk brocade, and then there is good, sturdy cotton for the rest of us. Both are fine materials, but they are not the same. This stratification of quality hints at another one of those academic arguments that will echo through the ages. Did the decline in the quality of Damascus steel happen suddenly, or was it a gradual process? Some historians argue that as the demand grew, smiths began to cut corners, producing lower-grade versions for a wider market. This dumbing down of the process, they suggest, might have led to the eventual loss of the most refined and complex techniques required for the top-tier blades. Others disagree, believing the art was preserved in its purest form by a select few masters until the very end, and its disappearance was caused by a more catastrophic event, like a disruption in the supply chain. As you sit there, you can see both sides of the argument. You can imagine a mastersmith under pressure from a less wealthy client, using a slightly inferior piece of raw material or rushing a step in the forging process, creating a blade that is good but not legendary. Over generations, these small compromises could add up, eroding the foundation of the craft until the original, perfect method was known only to a handful of purists. The dealer's words paint a picture of a complex economy built around this single material. There were miners in a distant land, merchants who risked long and dangerous journeys, dealers like him acting as gatekeepers and connoisseurs, and the secretive smiths who were the heart of it all. And at the top of the pyramid were the kings and sultans, whose wealth and desire for prestige funded the entire enterprise. The lamplight flickers, casting long shadows on the walls. The tea in your cup is cold now. You realize that to truly understand this metal, you can't stay here in the city, in the world of dealers and collectors. They are the end of the chain. You need to go to the beginning. You need to find the source of the magic. You thank the dealer for his time and his knowledge. He nods, a slight, knowing smile on his face, as if he knew all along that your curiosity would not be sated here. As you step out of the quiet courtyard and back into the cooling night air of the city, your decision is made. The soldier's boast, the dealer's dagger, the stories of kings, they all point in one direction, away from Damascus. You must find the land where this miraculous steel is born. Your journey is taking another sharp turn, leading you away from the glittering showrooms and toward the smoke and dust of the forge itself. The city of Damascus, with its bustling markets and whispered legends, begins to feel like a cage. It's a place of finished things, of stories that have already been told. The dagger in the dealer's shop was an answer, but it was also a lock. To find the key, you know you have to leave. The dealer's words echo in your mind. The secret isn't in the dust of our streets. The trail is cold here. You need to go where it's hot, where the story begins. You spend the next few weeks preparing. This isn't a casual trip to a neighboring town. This is a plunge into the unknown. You talk to caravan masters, to spice merchants, to sailors who have seen the sun rise over distant oceans. You piece together maps, which are less like scientific documents and more like hand-drawn tapestries of rumor and experience. The destination they all point to, the origin of the raw material for the legendary steel, is a land that sounds almost mythical. India. This is the next critical piece of historical fact in our puzzle. The raw material for true Damascus steel was not sourced locally in the Middle East. It came from a specific region in southern India, and some say Sri Lanka, and was traded across thousands of miles. It was a crucial part of a long and complex supply chain that connected the Indian subcontinent to the heart of the Persian and Arab worlds. Your preparations are practical and stark. You trade your traveler's clothes for the sturdier garb of a long-haul merchant. You buy a good, strong pair of sandals, knowing they will be your most important possession. You secure a place in a caravan, a moving city of camels, merchants, guards, and hangers-on, all bound together by the promise of profit at the end of a long and perilous road. The fee for your passage costs you nearly everything you have. The day of departure arrives before dawn. The air is cool and crisp. The sounds are different from the city's daytime. There's the low grumbling of camels being loaded, the clipped professional calls of the caravan guards, the soft murmur of goodbyes. You swing yourself onto your assigned camel, the animal groaning in protest. You find your place in the long, snaking line, a single, anonymous figure among hundreds. As the sun's first rays touch the ancient walls of Damascus, your caravan moves out, leaving the city and its secrets behind you. The journey is a lesson in humility. The world you knew shrinks to the back of the camel in front of you and the vast, unforgiving landscape around you. Days are a monotonous rhythm of swaying movement under a relentless sun. The landscape shifts from the dusty plains around Damascus to rocky, barren hills, and then to vast, empty deserts that seem to stretch into infinity. The nights are a stark contrast to brilliant, cold canopy of stars, more vivid than you've ever seen, with the sounds of the camp, soft conversations, the crackle of a fire, the distant howl of a jackal as your only lullaby. You learn the quiet camaraderie of the road. You share your meager food with the man next to you. You learn to read the clouds for the unlikely promise of rain. You listen to the stories of the veteran merchants, tales of sandstorms that can strip flesh from bone, of bandits who appear like ghosts from the rocks, and of oases that are nothing but shimmering, heartbreaking mirages. You also learn about the economics of the journey. One night, huddled around a small fire, you listen to a spice merchant complain about the endless taxes and tariffs. He told to leave the city, he grumbles, a toll to cross the river, a toll for the sheik whose lands we are now crossing, a toll for the gods who protect us from him. And you realize that the high price of the Damascus blade isn't just about the skill of the smith. It's about this. It's about the staggering cost and risk of transporting the raw material halfway across the known world. This is a fascinating, often overlooked aspect of ancient trade. The final price of an item often had less to do with its production cost and more to do with the immense logistical challenges of getting it from point A to point B. One afternoon, a young guard points to a cluster of weathered, sun-bleached bones near the side of the track, the remains of a camel. "Bandits?" you ask. He shakes his head. "Thirst," he says, with a grim finality that needs no further explanation. The sight is a sobering reminder of the razor-thin margin between life and death out here. It's a far cry from the perfumed, scholarly world of the Damascus dealer. This is the reality of the supply chain. As you travel, you hear whispers about the material you seek. The merchants call it wutsi. The name is strange, foreign on your tongue. They speak of it not as ore dug from the ground, but as something that is cooked in clay pots. Their descriptions are vague, shrouded in the same kind of mystery as the finished blades. But they all agree on one thing: it's special. It's not like other iron. The journey blurs into a montage of landscapes. Deserts give way to mountains, which in turn slope down into fertile, greener lands. The faces of the people change, as do their clothes and their languages. You cross rivers on rickety barges and navigate crowded port cities where the air is thick with the smell of salt and fish. You board a dhow, a ship with a triangular sail, and trust your life to the whims of the monsoon winds, sailing across an impossibly blue sea. And this is where another historical debate lies. What was the exact route? Did the majority of the raw steel travel overland via the Silk Road, or was it primarily a maritime journey across the Indian Ocean and up the Persian Gulf? Most scholars now agree it was likely a combination of both. Different routes would have been favored at different times, depending on the political climate, the season, and the ever-present threat of pirates and bandits. Your own journey is a mix, a testament to the flexibility and resilience of these ancient trade networks. After months that feel like years, you finally arrive on the coast of India. The humidity hits you like a wet cloth. The air is alive with a billion new sounds and smells, the chatter of monkeys, the scent of unknown blossoms, the pungent aroma of unfamiliar curries. You have made it. You have followed the legend back to its source. But you are a stranger in a strange land, and you have a feeling that the hardest part of your quest is still ahead. You need to find the people who don't just trade this mysterious woodsy steel, but who actually create it. You step off the dhow onto the soil of the Malabar coast, and the world is immediately, overwhelmingly different. The dry, muted tones of the desert have been replaced by a riot of green. The air is so thick with moisture you can almost drink it. The language is a fluid, musical current you can't hope to understand. Your caravan companions, their business done, disperse into the teeming port city, and for the first time in months, you are truly alone. Your quest for steel now feels more daunting than ever. In Damascus, it was a legend. On the road, it was a destination. Here, it's a local commodity you don't even know how to ask for. You spend your first few days just observing, learning the rhythm of this new place. You watch goods being unloaded from ships, spices, cotton, teakwood, and you realize you are at one of the great wellsprings of the global economy. Eventually, through a combination of clumsy gestures and the few words of a local dialect you manage to pick up from a friendly stall owner, you get a lead. The word you learn for what you seek is not wutsi. That seems to be a trader's term, perhaps a Persian bastardization of a local word. Here they call it yokaiku. When you say the word, people nod. They point inland away from the coast, towards the hazy, blue-tinged hills of the Deccan Plateau. Your journey continues, this time on foot, following dusty tracks that wind through rice paddies and small villages. You are an oddity here, your foreign features and sun-faded traveler's clothes marking you as an outsider. But the people are curious rather than hostile. You learn to smile, to trade a small coin for a piece of fruit, to accept the hospitality of a village elder who offers you a place to sleep on his porch. After several days of walking, you arrive in a village that feels different. The air is tinged with smoke, but it's not the cooking smoke you've grown accustomed to. It's a sharper, more industrial smell. You see men with soot-stained hands and hear the faint, rhythmic thump-thump, hump-thump of distant hammering. You have found a place where they work with metal. It takes time to earn a sliver of trust. You don't rush. You find a place to stay. You help with menial tasks, and you watch. From a distance, you observe the workshops. And finally, one day you see it. A man carries something out of a small, clay-walled furnace. He handles it with long iron tongs. It's not a blade, not a tool, not anything recognizable. It's a small, round, dark object, about the size of a flattened bread roll or a large biscuit. It looks rough, unimpressive, almost like a lump of stony waste. But the way the smith handles it with a practiced, careful motion tells you this is no ordinary lump. This, you realize with a jolt of excitement, is the prize you've been seeking. This is the raw material. This is the famous wutsi steel cake or ingot, a cornerstone of the entire Damascus steel process. Before it was ever touched by a master swordsmith in Persia or Syria, it began its life in this humble, cake-like form. The mainstream knowledge is that these ingots, produced through a unique crucible process, were the indivisible starting point. You couldn't make Damascus steel without first making or acquiring one of these. You manage to get a closer look. A trader is inspecting a small pile of the ingots. He picks one up, and you see that its surface is slightly crystalline with faint patterns on its dark gray skin. It looks incredibly dense. The smith who made it breaks one open with a sharp blow from a hammer, and you see the inside a bright, silvery, crystalline structure that glitters in the sun. The trader nods in satisfaction and begins to heckle. You're witnessing a crucial moment of quality control, and it's here you learn a fascinating, odd little detail. The local smiths and traders had their own methods for grading the ingots. One apocryphal tale suggests they would judge the quality by the sound it made when tapped, listening for a specific high-frequency ring that indicated a good cooking process. Another more practical method was to look at the dendritic patterns on the ingot's surface after it cooled. A skilled eye could tell from the fineness of these patterns whether the ingot had the right properties to later be forged into a high-quality blade. They were, in essence, reading the microscopic story of the metal long before it reached the forge. But as you watch this transaction, a subtle debate enters the picture. Why here? What was so special about this specific region of India? For centuries, historians and scientists have debated this question. One prominent theory, which you hear echoed in the talk of the local smiths, is that it was the ore itself. They speak of a specific type of iron ore, dug from nearby mines, that contains trace amounts of other elements. Vanadium, molybdenum, chromium, elements that modern metallurgists add to steel to create high-performance alloys. The ancient Indian smiths had no knowledge of these elements, of course. For them, it was just the good ore from that hill. They had, through generations of trial and error, discovered a unique geological accident and developed a process to exploit it. Other historians argue that while the ore was important, the true genius was in the process alone, and that the unique properties could have been achieved with other types of ore if the crucible method was followed precisely. The debate over special ingredients versus a special recipe is one that continues to this day. Was it the place or the people? You, standing here in the smoky air of this village, feel that it must be both. The land provided the raw materials, but it was the ingenuity of the people that transformed them. As the day ends, you use your last few valuable coins to purchase a single, small ingot for yourself. It feels heavy in your palm, a solid, unassuming lump of potential. It looks like nothing special. A gray metal cake. But you know what it is. It's a seed. It's the egg from which the dragon is hatched. Holding it, you feel a profound connection to the entire journey. From the soldier's boast in the Damascus market to this dusty village in India, you have followed the thread back to its origin. Now, you have a new problem. You possess the secret's beginning. But the end of the story, the transformation of this lump into a legendary blade, happens 1,000 miles away. Your journey is only half over. You must now retrace your steps to bring this humble cake of steel back to the forges of the master smiths. You cradle the woods, the steel ingot in your hand. It's cool, heavy, and dense. It feels like a stone, inert and unremarkable. Yet, you know that locked within this gray, lumpy disk is a microscopic universe of possibility. It's one thing to acquire it, it's another thing entirely to understand how it came to be. Your curiosity won't let you leave India just yet. You mean to see how this cake is baked. Winning the trust of the local smiths is a slow and delicate dance. They are a closed community, their knowledge passed down from father to son, not shared with wandering foreigners. But your genuine, almost academic, fascination seems to disarm them. You aren't a trader trying to steal their secrets for profit. You are simply a student, mesmerized by their craft. Eventually, an old weary smith with eyes as bright as the sparks from his forge takes a liking to you. He allows you to watch from a respectable distance the alchemical process of creating your kaiku. And what you witness is the heart of the matter, the core scientific principle behind this ancient technology, the crucible steel process. This is the mainstream historical knowledge that sets Wutsi's steel apart from all other iron and steel of the era. While European smiths were still struggling with bloomery iron, which was full of slag and impurities, these craftsmen in India had developed a method to create a pure, high-carbon steel. The process begins with a curious mix of ingredients. The old smith takes a crucible, a small, sealed clay pot, which is the key to the entire operation. Into this pot, he places a specific combination of materials. There's the high-quality iron ore, which you now know is geologically special. But he also adds charcoal, the source of the carbon that will transform the iron into steel. And then he adds pieces of glass and specific leaves and plant matter. You watch, fascinated, as he carefully seals the crucible with a lump of wet clay, making it airtight. He then places the crucible, along with a dozen others, into a sunken, charcoal-fueled furnace. A team of young men begins to work the bellows, their rhythmic pumping feeding air to the fire, raising the temperature higher and higher. The process is long and slow. The furnace will be kept at a searing, consistent heat for many hours, sometimes even a full day. The old smith explains through a mixture of gestures and the few words you now share what is happening inside that sealed pot. It's a miniature, self-contained industrial revolution. Inside the crucible, under immense heat, the iron melts. The charcoal provides the carbon, which slowly dissolves into the molten iron. The crucial part is that this happens in a controlled, oxygen-free environment. The sealed pot prevents the iron from reacting with the air, which would burn off the precious carbon and introduce impurities. The glass melts and forms a liquid layer on top of the metal, acting as a flux to draw out any remaining impurities from the ore, which become trapped in a layer of slag. This is where you learn a truly bizarre, niche detail about the process. The leaves and plant matter. Why were they added? For centuries, this puzzled observers and later scientists. The old smith gives you a simple, practical answer. As the furnace heats up, the organic matter inside the sealed crucible burns. This creates a small amount of gas pressure inside the pot. The smiths would watch the tops of the crucibles, and when they saw them start to bulge or hiss slightly, they knew the correct temperature had been reached. It was an ancient, or organic pressure gauge. A piece of ingenious, low-tech engineering that allowed for precise temperature control without a thermometer. You watch as the furnace burns for what feels like an eternity. The sun sets, and the glow from the furnace pit paints the surrounding huts in an orange, hellish light. The smiths work in shifts, their bodies slick with sweat, never letting the bellows fall silent. Finally, the process is deemed complete. The furnace is allowed to cool, a process that is just as important and as carefully controlled as the heating. The cooling must be slow, gradual. This allows the magic to happen inside the crucible. As the molten, high-carbon steel slowly solidifies, something incredible occurs on a microscopic level. The excess carbon, which can't remain dissolved in the solid iron, precipitates out. It doesn't do so randomly. It forms crystalline structures, intricate networks of iron carbide, a compound called cemented E within the softer steel matrix. This is the birth of the pattern. The jawhar isn't created in the forge by the swordsmith, it is born here, in the crucible, during this slow, controlled cooling. And this very point is the source of a persistent academic debate. What was the exact recipe? Well, we understand the general principles now. The specifics are lost to time. How much carbon was the perfect amount? What was the precise temperature? How slow was the cooling? Was the type of wood used for the charcoal important? Did the specific chemical composition of the clay crucible play a role? Modern scientists can create crucible steel, but recreating the exact conditions to produce the specific properties and aesthetic beauty of high quality wuzi is another matter. It's like knowing the ingredients for a cake but not the oven temperature or the mixing time. The final result is exquisitely sensitive to these tiny, unrecorded variables. The next day, the crucibles are cool enough to be handled. The old smith takes a hammer and carefully breaks one open. He discards the glassy slag on top. And there, at the bottom of the pot, is the prize of freshly minted wuzi steel ingot, its surface covered in the telltale crystalline pattern that signals a successful creation. You look at the unassuming metal cake you bought with a new-found sense of wonder. It is not a lump of rock. It is a carefully crafted micro-universe. It is a testament to generations of accumulated knowledge of trial and error, of a deep, intuitive understanding of materials that feels less like science and more like a conversation with the elements themselves. You have witnessed the first great secret. Now you must take this seed of potential and return to the world of the swordsmiths, to see how they nurture it and make it grow into the legendary blade that started you on this path. Your time in India is over. You say your goodbyes to the old smith, who simply nods, a silent acknowledgement of the shared unspoken understanding of his craft. With the precious ingot safely wrapped and tucked away, you begin the long journey back west. The journey back is different. On the way to India, you were a seeker, chasing a rumor. Now, you are a guardian, carrying a tangible piece of the mystery. The small, heavy ingot in your pack feels like a stone of immense gravity, pulling you back towards the forges of the Middle East. The sea voyage on the dhow, the long swaying trek with the caravan across the desert, it all feels more purposeful this time. You are no longer just a passenger, you are a courier, a link in the chain. When you finally see the familiar, sun-baked walls of Damascus in the distance, a strange feeling washes over you. It feels like coming home, but to a home you only just discovered. You are no longer the naive traveler who was captivated by a soldier's boast in the marketplace. You have seen the source, the crucible where the magic begins. You don't return to the opulent, quiet room of the antiques dealer. His world is one of finished products, of legends polished and sold. You are interested in the noise, the grit, the sweat. You head towards the sound of hammering, to the part of the city where the air is perpetually hazed with coal smoke. This is the smith's quarter, a labyrinth of narrow alleyways and open-fronted workshops, each one a small pocket of heat and rhythmic noise. This is the historical landscape where the transformation happens. While the raw material, the woodsy steel, came from India, it was in the great metalworking centers of the Middle East, places like Damascus, of course, but also cities in Persia and Egypt, that it was forged into the legendary blades. Damascus became the most famous name associated with the final product, the brand that history remembers, partly because it was a major center for both production and trade, a final finishing school for the raw Indian steel. The atmosphere here is a world away from the tranquil, almost ritualistic process you witnessed in the Indian village. This is a place of intense, focused energy. The air rings with a constant, metallic chorus, the sharp ping of a small hammer on hot steel, the deep thud of a sledgehammer on an anvil, the hiss of hot metal quenching in water. The ground beneath your feet seems to vibrate with the force of it all. You see smiths of all kinds. Some are making simple tools, horseshoes, nails, hinges. Their work is loud, fast, and functional. But you are looking for something else. You are looking for the artists. You find them in the more secluded workshops, set back from the main thoroughfares. Their workspaces are often cleaner, more organized. The sound from their forges is more measured, less frantic. These are not just blacksmiths, they are wordsmiths, and they are a class apart. You approach one such workshop. A master smith, a man with powerful arms and a focused, intense gaze, is examining a blade, holding it up to the light. He is not looking for imperfections you could see from a distance. He is reading the steel, his eyes tracing the subtle lines in the metal that you've come to recognize. Presenting your woots, ingot is a gamble. It is your entrance ticket, your letter of introduction. You unwrap the small, dense cake of steel and hold it out. The master smith stops his work. He takes the ingot from you, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. He turns it over and over, his thumb tracing the crystalline pattern on its surface. He brings it close to his eye, scrutinizing it in the dim light of the forge. He then walks over to a corner and taps it with a small hammer. It lets out a clear, high-pitched string that hangs in the air for a moment. He looks at you, his expression unreadable. He has seen countless such ingots, brought by merchants from across the sea, but he sees something different in you. Not the avarice of a trader, but the deep curiosity of a fellow enthusiast. He sees the long journey in your eyes. He gives a curt nod. It is not a welcome, not an invitation to friendship. It is a simple, professional acknowledgement. You have brought good material. For now, that is enough. He gestures for you to stay to watch. He is not offering to teach you, but he is allowing you to be present. It is more than you could have hoped for. This brings up a fascinating, less discussed aspect of this craft, the relationship between the suppliers of the raw material and the smiths who worked it. The smiths were entirely dependent on the quality of the woots, ingots arriving from India. A mastersmith could probably tell just by looking at and handling an ingot whether it would forge into a masterpiece or a failure. This created a dynamic where experienced smiths were also expert assessors of the raw material, their knowledge crucial for merchants who wanted to ensure they were buying high-quality stuff. The smith's nod is not just an acceptance of you, but a professional appraisal of your purchase. However, a subtle historical debate is embedded here. How much did the Damascus smiths actually know about the crucible process in India? Did they receive instructions or feedback with the shipments? Or was it a black box situation where they simply received the ingots and, through their own immense skill, figured out how to work this strange, high-carbon material? Most evidence points to the latter. The Indian crucible process and the Middle Eastern forging process seem to have been two separate, highly specialized bodies of knowledge that rarely, if ever, overlapped. The smiths here didn't know how the cake was baked, they just knew the best way to turn it into a sword. You find a spot in the corner of the workshop out of the way, and you settle in to watch. The forge is a controlled volcano of glowing coals. The anvil, a massive block of iron worn smooth by centuries of use, sits like an altar in the center of the room. The tools hanging on the wall, tongs, hammers of all shapes and sizes, chisels, are not just tools. They are extensions of the smith's own hands, each one with a specific purpose. The master smith does not begin work on your ingot. It sits on a bench waiting. He is in the middle of another project, a long, elegant saber. You realize this is a place of patience. Nothing is rushed. The transformation of your humble steel cake will not happen in an hour or a day. It will be a long, deliberate process. You have journeyed from the showroom to the source, and now you have arrived at the studio. You are about to witness the second great secret, how a lump of pattern potential is drawn out, hammered, and coaxed into the form of a legendary blade. The air is hot and thick with the smell of coal and hot metal, but to you it smells like answers. Days turn into a week. You become part of the workshop's furniture, a silent observer in the corner. You sweep the floor, fetch water, and manage the charcoal supply. You do anything that makes you useful without being intrusive. You learn the rhythm of the place, the ebb and flow of the work. And in doing so, you begin to understand that this workshop is not just a place of labor, it's a sanctuary, governed by a strict, unspoken code. The master smith, whom you learn, is named Al-Hadid, which simply means the smith rarely speaks. His instructions to his two young apprentices are given with a nod, a grunt, or a single, sharp word. Everything has its place. Hammers are returned to their specific hooks on the wall. Tongs are cooled and stacked in a precise order. No tool is ever left lying on the ground. This is the first rule of the workshop order. A misplaced tool could mean a moment's hesitation, and a moment's hesitation could ruin a blade that has taken weeks to forge. This disciplined environment is a key, though often overlooked, aspect of any high-level craft. The romance of the lone, chaotic genius is largely a myth. In reality, the creation of masterpieces, whether a painting or a sword, requires immense discipline, organization, and repetition. The workshop's tidings is a direct reflection of the mental clarity required for the work. One sweltering afternoon, a wealthy merchant, draped in fine linens and smelling of expensive perfume, enters the workshop unannounced. He strides in, ignoring the apprentices, and begins speaking loudly to Al-Hadid, demanding to know when his commissioned scimitar will be ready. Al-Hadid doesn't stop his work. He continues his steady, rhythmic hammering on a piece of glowing steel. He lets the merchant finish his impatient tirade. Then he slowly places his hammer on the anvil, picks up the hot steel with his tongs, and plunges it back into the heart of the forge. He turns to the merchant, his face calm, but his eyes like hard coals. He says nothing. He simply stares. The silence stretches, thick and heavy. The only sound is the soft roar of the fire. The merchant, flustered by the smith's silent, unyielding gaze, begins to stammer. His arrogance deflates like a pricked balloon. He mutters an apology and backs out of the workshop. This is the second rule: respect. Respect for the smith, respect for the craft, and respect for the time it takes. You cannot rush perfection. This interaction teaches you more than a dozen conversations ever could. Al-Hadid's authority in this space is absolute, not because of his physical strength, but because of his skill. He is the master of a coveted secret, and that gives him a power that even wealth cannot command. Here you stumble upon a more obscure, almost sociological detail about these master craftsmen. They occupied a unique social stratum. They were artisans working with their hands, which in many hierarchical societies would place them below the scholars, priests, and nobility. However, the vital importance of their work, creating the finest weapons for the military and luxury items for the elite, gave them a special status. A true master swordsmith was often highly respected, well compensated, and granted a degree of autonomy that other artisans could only dream of. They were, in a sense, untouchable, protected by the value of their own knowledge. As you spend more time in the workshop, You notice other subtler rules. Al-Haddad often works in the early morning or late at night, when the light from the sun is not streaming directly into the workshop. He explains in a rare moment of conversation that the true color of the hot steel can only be judged accurately in dim, consistent light. The shifting daylight can deceive the eye, leading to a mistaken temperature, which can be fatal to the blade. This obsession with temperature control leads to a simmering, centuries-long debate among those who studied the craft. What were the exact forging temperatures? We know from modern analysis that Wuxi steel, because of its high carbon content, is incredibly difficult to work. If you heat it too much, the intricate network of carbides that creates the pattern and the strength will dissolve back into the metal, permanently erased. If you don't heat it enough, the steel becomes brittle and can shatter under the hammer. The smiths had to work in a narrow, low-temperature window, likely between 650 and 850 degrees Celsius, a range they identified purely by the color of the glowing metal. The argument lies in how they achieved such consistency. Was it just the smith's eye, a skill so refined it bordered on the supernatural? Or did they have other methods? Some historians propose they used a tell, like watching for a specific type of spark to fly off the metal, or listening for a change in the sound of the hammer strike. Others believe the secret lay in the type of charcoal used, which might burn at a more consistent and predictable temperature. The truth is, we don't know for sure. The knowledge was so deeply embedded in the smith's senses that it was never written down. It was a physical, intuitive science. One evening, one of the apprentices, a boy no older than 15, leaves a pair of tongs on the floor. Al-Haddad sees it. He stops his work, walks over, picks up the tongs, and places them on the proper rack. He then looks at the apprentice and simply says again, "And you are gone." The threat is delivered quietly, without anger, but it carries the weight of absolute law. The boy turns pale and nods, his eyes wide. You realize that Jinji, the taboos of the workshop, are not arbitrary rules. They are the guardians of the process, the order, the respect, the control of light and heat, the absolute focus. They all serve one purpose: to create the perfect environment for a miraculous transformation to occur. It is within this sacred, disciplined space that your humble Wuxi ingot will finally be brought to the anvil. You have earned your place in the corner, and the master has decided the time is right. The real lesson is about to begin. The day finally comes. Al-Haddad takes your Wuxi ingot from the bench where it has been rusting. He holds it for a moment, weighing it in his palm as if reacquainting himself with its potential. He then gestures to one of the apprentices, who begins to stoke the forge, bringing the coals to a steady, vibrant glow. You lean forward, every sense alert. The preliminaries are over. Al-Haddad doesn't simply toss the ingot into the fire. He places it carefully at the edge of the hottest part of the coals, not directly in the heart of the flame. He watches it, his eyes narrowed with an intensity that seems to block out the rest of the world. This is not the brute force heating you've seen other smiths use for common iron. This is a slow, gentle coaxing, HES watching for a specific color. This is the critical, mainstream knowledge about forging Damascus steel. Temperature control is everything. As you learn it from the workshop's rules, too much heat is the enemy. It will ruin the Wuxi steel's unique internal structure. The master smith is waiting for the metal to reach a very specific, soft, glowing red, not the bright orange or yellow-white you might associate with a forge. He is aiming for a subtle, rich hue that old texts and modern metallurgists describe as the color of a rising sun, or more commonly, a dull cherry red. Once the ingot reaches this precise color, he pulls it from the forge with his tongs. He places it on the anvil, and the hammering begins. But again, it's not what you expect. There are no mighty, two-handed sledgehammer blows. He uses a relatively small, light hammer, and his strikes are quick, controlled, and almost delicate. It's not about deforming the metal with brute force. It's about persuading it. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm is fast but steady. He works the ingot, slowly beginning to draw it out, to elongate the round cake into a rough, rectangular bar. After a short burst of hammering just before the color fades from the steel, he immediately returns it to the forge to be gently reheated. This cycle repeats over and over again. Heat, hammer, reheat. It's a hypnotic, painstaking process. Hours pass. The sun climbs higher in the sky, but in the dim, controlled light of the workshop, time seems to be measured only by the glowing and fading of the steel and the rhythm of the hammer. You realize you are witnessing an act of supreme patience. Forging a Damascus blade is a marathon, not a sprint. The smith is carefully manipulating the steel on a microscopic level, alienating the crystalline structures born in the Indian crucible, not destroying them. This low-temperature forging is where a strange and wonderful piece of trivia comes into play, something that seems counterintuitive. Damascus steel is actually one of the earliest examples of what modern science calls superplasticity. Superplasticity is the ability of some crystalline materials to undergo extreme deformation without breaking, but only within a very narrow band of temperature and at a slow rate of deformation. Al-Haddad, without any knowledge of the underlying physics, has found this sweet spot through generations of empirical discovery. He is in essence performing high-tech materials science with nothing but his eyes, his hands, and his hammer. He knows, through feel and experience, that if he hammers too hard or lets the steel get too cool, it will crack. The delicate, high-carbon structure that makes the steel so special also makes it incredibly fragile during the forging process. This incredible fragility is the source of a major historical debate. Was the process of forging Wootz steel so incredibly difficult that failure was common, even for a master? Some historical accounts and modern experiments suggest a very high failure rate. A smith might successfully forge 9 blades, only to have the 10th one shatter on the anvil with a single ill-timed blow, wasting weeks of work and a priceless ingot. This would have made each successful blade even more valuable. Other historians argue that a true master, like Al-Haddad, would have had a near-perfect success rate. They believe the smith's intuitive understanding of the material was so complete that catastrophic failure was rare. The debate touches on how we view historical craftsmanship. Do we see it as a constant struggle against the odds, full of trial and error? Or do we see it as a state of perfected mastery where the craftsman has such a deep connection with their material that they can avoid failure almost entirely? Watching Al-Haddad work, his movements so confident and economical, you tend to believe the latter. He seems to be in a silent conversation with the steel, listening to its responses under the hammer. As the day wears on, the ingot is no longer an ingot. It is now a long, thick bar of dark, unremarkable steel. To an untrained eye, it looks like any other piece of forged iron. The beautiful surface patterns of the original Wootz sea cake are long gone, hidden by scale and the marks of the hammer. It looks like you have gone backward from something beautiful to something plain. But Al-Haddad seems pleased. He inspects the bar, turning it over and over, checking for any tiny hairline cracks. He finds none. The first, most dangerous stage of the forging is complete. The soul of the blade, its internal structure, has been preserved and elongated. The foundation is sound. He sets the bar aside to cool slowly. The work for the day is done. You are exhausted just from watching, your mind saturated with the heat, the rhythm, and the intense focus of it all. You look at the simple steel bar, and then you think of the delicate cherry-red glow, the patient tapping of the hammer. You understand now that the strength of the final blade is not beaten into it. It is coaxed out. It was there all along, and the smith's job is not to create it, but to carefully, respectfully reveal it. The plain, dark bar of steel rests in the corner of the workshop for a day, cooling completely. The initial, dangerous work of drawing out the Wootz, the ingot, is done. Now, Al-Haddad will begin to shape it to give it a recognizable form. But as he returns to the forge, you notice him preparing something new, something that seems utterly out of place in a blacksmith's shop. He takes a small clay pot and begins to mix a strange concoction. He grinds something in a stone mortar, creating a fine white powder. You get a closer look and realize with a jolt that it's glass. He is painstakingly crushing fragments of old glass into a dust-like powder. Next to it, he has a small pile of dried leaves, which you recognize from the local sycamore fig tree. He mixes the glass powder, the crumbled leaves, and a bit of clay with water to form a thin, gray paste. This is where the process veers from straightforward metallurgy into something that feels more like folk magic or alchemy. What on earth is a master swordsmith doing with glass and leaves? He takes the steel bar and gently heats it again, not to the cherry reed of forging, but just enough to warm it. Then, using a cloth, he carefully coats the entire bar with this strange gritty paste. He sets it aside to dry. Once the coating is hard, the bar goes back into the forge, this time to be heated for shaping. As the steel reaches that familiar, soft glowing reed, the paste melts into a liquid, glassy shell around the metal. This is a truly weird and wonderful piece of little-known craft. This glassy coating served a critical, scientific purpose. The biggest enemy of high-carbon steel during forging, besides excessive heat, is oxygen. The oxygen in the air wants to bond with the carbon in the steel, a process called decarburization. It literally sucks the carbon out of the surface of the blade, which is the very element that makes it strong and hard. This glassy shell, this flux, acts as a barrier, sealing the steel off from the air. It prevents decarburization, ensuring that the precious carbon content remains locked within the blade. The smith is essentially creating a private, oxygen-free atmosphere for his work pickup. The leaves, rich in carbon themselves, would burn and contribute to this protective, carbon-rich environment right at the surface of the steel. Owl-headed begins the hammering process anew. This time the goal is to shape the bar. The work is more forceful now, the blows of the hammer more deliberate and defining. He starts to form the tang, the narrow part of the blade that will eventually go into the hilt. Then he works on the spine, the thick, strong back of the blade. Finally, he begins to hammer out the bevels, the angled surfaces that will slope down to form the cutting edge. Each time the blade comes out of the forge, it's gleaming with this molten layer of glass. The hammer blows crackle and spit as they strike the glassy coating, sending tiny, sparkling shards flying. The process is mesmerizing, a shower of man-made sparks. This is where another historical debate arises, a disagreement over the secret recipes that were rumored to be part of the forging process. For centuries, travelers' tales and romanticized stories have embellished the craft with all sorts of exotic and frankly bizarre additives. Some stories claim that smiths would mix in things like bone meal, other scraps. Others whispered of strange rituals. While a modern mind might dismiss these as pure fantasy, the use of glass and leaves shows that there was a real, scientific basis for some of these seemingly magical ingredients. The debate among historians and archaeometallurgists is about where to draw the line. Which of these rumored additives were real and functional, and which were just myth? The glass flux is now widely accepted as a real and clever technique. But what about other materials? For example, some researchers have theorized that the trace element of vanadium, found in the Indian ore, was a secret ingredient. They argue its presence was crucial for the formation of the carbide patterns. Other scholars disagree, arguing that while vanadium might have helped, it wasn't the magic bullet, and that the process was more important than any single trace element. They believe that the focus on a single secret ingredient misses the point. The genius was in the holistic process. You watch Al-Had at work, and you can see the logic. He is not a magician, he is a chemist and a physicist, using the materials he has on hand to solve complex problems. The glass is not an incantation, it's a shield. The leaves are not an offering to the gods of the forge, they are a source of carbon. He is practicing a science that has not yet been named. Over the course of the day, a recognizable shape emerges from the bar. It is long, gracefully curved, and tapered to a deadly point. It is a sword in its rawest form. The surface is still rough, covered in the dark scale and remnants of the glassy flux. It has the shape of a weapon, but not yet its soul. As the sun sets, Owl-Headed finishes the shaping. He inspects every inch of the blade, his eyes scanning for any flaws. The basic geometry is now perfect. The weight, the balance, it is all there, defined by the hammer. He seems satisfied. The blade is set aside to cool slowly, still wrapped in its protective, now crackled shell. You look at the strange paste of glass and leaves, and you have to smile. Who would have thought that the secret to forging the world's most advanced steel involved a recipe that sounds like something a child would mix up in the backyard? It's a humble, almost comical solution to a problem of high-tech material science. It's a perfect example of human ingenuity, of using what you have to create something legendary. The blade has its shape. It has been born from the Wu-Tsi ingot, drawn out, and sculpted by the hammer. It has the profile of a sword, but it is not yet a sword. It is still relatively soft, annealed by the repeated cycles of heating and slow cooling. It could be bent, and it wouldn't hold a sharp edge. The final, most dramatic, and most perilous step of the heat treatment is yet to come: the quench. This is the moment of truth. The quench or hardening is a fundamental and well-known part of bladesmithing across all cultures. The principle is simple: heat the steel to a critical temperature, then cool it with shocking rapidity. This rapid cooling traps the steel's internal structure in a hard, brittle, stressed state called martensite. This is what gives a blade its hardness and its ability to hold a razor-sharp edge. For a Damascus blade, however, this step is fraught with even more danger than usual. Al-Haddad prepares for the quench with a solemnity that borders on ritual. The atmosphere in the workshop shifts. The apprentices are silent and still. There is a palpable tension in the air. A mistake here will not just ruin the blade, it will shatter it. The weeks of painstaking work, from the crucible in India to the forge in Damascus, can be undone in a single, catastrophic second. First, he prepares the quenching medium. He gestures to a long, narrow trough filled with a dark, thick liquid. It's oil. You can smell its heavy, cloying scent. The choice of quenchant is critical. Water cools too fast, creating immense thermal shock that would almost certainly crack the high-carbon woodsy steel. Oil cools slower, more gently, reducing the risk of a fatal crack. This choice of oil over water is a key technical detail of the process. Now comes the most mysterious and debated part of the entire craft: the fantastical stories surrounding the quenching liquid. This is where you encounter some of the most outlandish and ghoulish legends associated with Damascus steel. You've heard whispers and tall tales in the marketplaces about the secret ingredients used for the quench. The most infamous legend, a piece of pure, dark fantasy, is that the ultimate blade was quenched by plunging it into the body of a living slave, the idea being that the life force of the victim would be transferred to the weapon. This is, of course, almost certainly a myth, a piece of horrifying propaganda likely invented by enemies to demonize these legendary weapons and their makers. However, there are other, slightly more plausible though still unproven legends. Some stories claim that the perfect quenchant was the urine of a red-headed boy, or that of a goat that had been fed only ferns. It sounds ridiculous, but modern science offers a sliver of a potential explanation. These liquids contain salts and minerals, like nitrates and phosphates. A saline solution has different cooling properties than pure water or oil. It's possible that these smiths discovered, through bizarre trial and error, that certain biological fluids created a quenching bath with a specific, desirable cooling rate. This is a point of intense scholarly argument. Are these stories pure folklore designed to mystify the craft and scare away competitors? Or do they contain a kernel of forgotten science, a recipe whose ingredients sound magical but had a real physical effect? Most historians lean towards the former, arguing that a skilled smith would have relied on a consistent, controllable medium like oil, not something as variable and bizarre as a specific animal's urine. The legends were likely just part of the mystique, the marketing that made the blade seem even more powerful and otherworldly. Al-Haddad uses simple dark oil. There are no magical incantations, no buzzer additives. His focus is entirely on the steel itself. He places the shaped and refined blade into the forge for the final time. This time he is not watching for the dull cherry red of forging. He is looking for a slightly higher temperature, a specific moment when the steel becomes non-magnetic. This is the temperature of austenitization, the point at which the carbon is fully dissolved and the internal structure is ready to be transformed by the quench. He has a small piece of lodestone and actual magnet on a string, and you see him test the blade. When it no longer attracts the stone, he knows the moment is right. He pulls the glowing blade from the forge. It seems to hang in the air for an eternity, a blade of pure light. Then, with a smooth, decisive motion, he plunges it edge first into the trough of oil. There is a violent roaring hiss. A thick cloud of acrid smoke erupts from the trough, filling the workshop. The smell is intense, a mix of burning oil and hot metal. The blade is completely submerged. For a few moments, the oil bubbles and churns as if possessed. Then, silence. The tension in the room is so thick you could cut it with the very knife being born. Did it work? Did it survive? Al-Haddad slowly, carefully lifts the blade from the oil. It is black, coated in burnt residue, and utterly transformed. It is no longer a soft, pliable piece of metal. It is now incredibly hard, but also incredibly brittle like glass. If he were to drop it now, it would likely shatter. He holds it up, inspecting the long, graceful curve for any signs of warping or the dreaded hairline cracks that would signal failure. His face is a stone mask of concentration. He runs a practiced finger along the spine. He turns it over and over. Finally, he gives a single, almost imperceptible nod. Success. The blade has survived its trial by fire and oil. It has been given its hardness. But the journey isn't over. It is now too hard to brittle. It needs to be tempered to have some of that brittleness drawn out to give it resilience and toughness. But the most dangerous moment has passed. The ice and fire of the quench have given the blade its fundamental power. The blade that emerges from the quenching oil is a shadow of its future self. It's dark, coated in a crust of burnt oil and scale, and while it's now incredibly hard, it's also dangerously brittle. Al-Haddad handles it with the care one might reserve for a sheet of thin glass. The next crucial step is tempering, a process of gently reheating the blade to a much lower temperature to relieve the internal stresses created by the quench. This trades a small amount of hardness for a great deal of toughness, preventing the blade from shattering in use. He carefully cleans the scale off one section of the blade's spine, polishing it until the metal shines bright. This polished spot will act as his thermometer. He then uses the radiant heat from the forge, not the direct flames, to slowly, carefully warm the steel. He watches the polished spot with the focus of a hawk. As the steel heats up, its surface oxidizes, forming a thin layer that creates a predictable spectrum of colors. First, the faint, pale straw yellow, then a deeper gold, then a peacock blue, and finally a gray. Each color corresponds to a specific temperature. He is looking for a specific shade, likely a bronze or a deep blue, which indicates the perfect balance of hardness and toughness for a sword. Once the color appears, he lets the blade cool slowly in the air. The final heat treatment is complete. The blade now possesses its mechanical properties, a razor-sharp, hard edge, and a tough, resilient body. But it still doesn't look like the legendary weapon from the marketplace. The beautiful watery pattern, the jawhar, is completely hidden. The blade is a uniform, dull, dark gray. To an outsider, it looks like a failure. Where is the magic? Where is the water silk pattern? You feel a pang of disappointment. After all this, the journey to India, the crucible, the patient forging, the perilous quench, the result is this plain-looking blade. But Al-Haddad is unconcerned. He knows the secret is still there, sleeping just beneath the surface. Now comes the final act of revelation. This is the part of the process that truly separates Damascus steel from all other metals, the edge. The iconic pattern is not visible until the very end, after the blade is ground, polished, and then subjected to a mild acid. This is a crucial piece of mainstream knowledge. The pattern is revealed, not created, by the final finishing steps. Al-Haddad begins the long, laborious process of finishing. He uses a series of abrasive stones and sands, starting with coarse grits and moving to finer and finer ones. He grinds away the fire scale, smooths the hammer marks, and defines the crisp lines of the bevels. This is meticulous, dusty work that takes hours of focused effort. The workshop is filled with the scraping, scratching sound of abrasion. As he works, the blade begins to gleam, but the surface remains a uniform, silvery gray. When the blade is polished to a near-mirror finish, the time has come. Al-Haddad takes out another clay pot. This one contains a greenish liquid that gives off a sour, vinegary smell. It's a mild corrosive and agent. This is another area where the old smiths' knowledge of their environment came into play. And here lies a small, fascinating, and slightly gross piece of trivia. What was in the agent? The exact formulas were, like everything else, closely guarded secrets. They were likely mixtures of naturally occurring acids. One common ingredient was probably ferric sulfate, known as ZiAJ in Arabic, which could be derived from certain mineral deposits. But other, More organic acids were likely used as well. Lemon juice, vinegar, and even something as simple as sour grape juice could have been part of the recipe. They were using kitchen chemistry to perform the final, critical step of metallurgical revelation. Al Hadid submerges the polished blade into the acidic solution. He lets it sit for a while, then pulls it out and rinses it. He rubs it with a cloth and fine ash, then submerges it again. He repeats this process several times. At first, nothing seems to be happening. But then, as you watch closely, something miraculous occurs. As if an invisible ink is being developed, faint lines begin to appear on the surface of the steel. They are gray at first, ghost-like. With each cycle of etching and drubbing, they grow darker, more defined. The uniform gray surface breaks apart into 1,000 swirling, chaotic, beautiful lines. The water pattern, the soul of the blade, awakens. The science behind this is elegant. The roots E-steel is a composite material on a microscopic level. It's made of two different things: the softer, darker steel matrix perlite and the incredibly hard, bright networks of iron carbide cemented E. The acid in the etchant attacks the softer steel matrix more aggressively than it attacks the harder carbides. It eats away at the darker parts, making them appear even darker and slightly recessed, while the bright carbide structures are left relatively untouched, standing out in sharp relief. The etch is essentially a process of differential erosion on a microscale, creating the topography that our eyes perceive as a pattern. This is also where one final, subtle academic debate comes into focus. Did the final look of the pattern depend more on the initial Wuzi ingot, or on the skill of the smith during the forging and etching? Some metal adjusters argue that the map for the pattern was irrevocably set during the cooling of the crucible in India. The smith in Damascus was just developing the film. Others contend that the smith's forging technique, the direction of the hammer blows, how much the steel was folded or twisted, though true Wuzi wasn't typically folded like Japanese steel, could significantly alter and refine the final pattern. Furthermore, the type of etchant used, its strength, and the duration of the etch could all be manipulated to either create a high contrast, bold pattern or a more subtle, delicate one. It was likely a partnership. A great ingot in the hands of a mediocre smith would yield a mediocre blade, while a master like Al Hadid could take a good ingot and make its pattern truly sing. Al Hadid pulls the blade out for the last time. He neutralizes the acid, oils the blade, and holds it up. In the dim light of the forge, it is breathtaking. The dark, watery lines swirl and dance along the length of the curve. The rows and ladder structures you heard about are there, a complex tapestry of light and shadow trapped in steel. It is the blade from the soldier's scabbard, the dagger from the dealer's chest, but now you know its entire life story. You have seen its soul being born. It is finally truly complete. Al Hadid carefully attaches a simple, functional wooden hilt to the newly finished blade. It is now, in every sense, a complete weapon. He holds it, testing its balance, the graceful curve feeling like a natural extension of his arm. He takes a piece of scrap leather, thick and tough, and with a flick of his wrist that is too fast to follow, he draws the blade through it. There is no sound of cutting, just a soft thump as a cleanly severed piece of leather falls to the floor. The cut is so effortless it seems impossible. You are witnessing the legendary performance of Damascus steel, the quality that made it so feared and coveted on the battlefield. But why is it so good? You've seen how it's made, but the deep, scientific reason for its superiority is still a mystery to you. And indeed, it was a mystery to the very men who created it. The mainstream understanding, held for centuries, was that the blade's properties came from its composite nature. It was believed to be a perfect combination of hardness and flexibility. The networks of hard iron carbide cemented formed a microscopic, serrated cutting edge, allowing it to be sharpened to a terrifying degree. Meanwhile, the softer, more ductile steel matrix that surrounded these carbide structures gave the blade its resilience, allowing it to absorb the shock of impact without shattering. It was, in essence, a single piece of steel that acted like a high-tech composite material, combining the best properties of two different types of metal. This explanation is correct, but as you'll soon learn, it's not the whole story. Al Hadid sees the question in your eyes. He can't explain it in the language of science, but he can explain it in the language of a craftsman. Other blades, he says, his voice rough from the forge's smoke, you must choose. Hard and it will snap. Soft and it will dull. This steel, it does not ask you to choose. The hardness and the softness live together. They support each other. It's a simple, elegant, and perfectly accurate description of a complex material property. But the true wow moment, the piece of obscure and frankly mind-blowing information, would not be discovered until centuries later, in the age of electron microscopes. Modern scientists examining genuine, well-preserved antique Damascus blades found something that no one, not even the most visionary sci-fi author, could have predicted. They found carbon nanotubes. Yes, you read that right. Carbon nanotubes, one of the most famous and promising materials of 21st century nanotechnology. A substance hailed for its incredible strength-to-weight ratio was being unintentionally produced by blacksmiths in the Middle Ages. You, of course, have no way of knowing this. You are standing in a dusty, dimly lit workshop a world away from clean rooms and electron microscopes. But imagine, for a moment, that you could shrink down, until you were swimming through the microscopic structure of the blade Al-Hadid is holding. You would see the familiar landscape of the iron carbide structures winding through the softer steel. But then you'd see something else. Inside those cemented structures, you would find incredibly fine, perfectly formed, hollow cylinders made of carbon atoms, nanotubes. How did they get there? The current theory is that the trace elements in the Indian Wuxi, or specifically elements like vanadium and molybdenum, acted as catalysts during the forging process. The repeated cycles of heating and hammering, combined with the presence of these catalysts, encouraged the carbon atoms to align and form these ultra-strong microscopic tubes. The plant fibers added to the crucible may have also played a role, providing a source of nanowires that helped seed the growth of the nanotubes. The ancient smiths, in their quest to make a better sword, had accidentally stumbled upon a recipe for creating one of the most advanced materials known to man. These nanotubes would have reinforced the hard cemented structures, making them even stronger and more durable, contributing to the blade's legendary ability to hold an edge. This discovery of carbon nanotubes is, without a doubt, one of the most exciting and debated topics in the study of historical metallurgy. The central question of the academic argument is how much of a role did these nanotubes really play? One camp of scientists argues that they are the missing ingredient, the true secret to the Damascus blade's unparalleled properties. They believe the incredible strength and sharpness can only be explained by the presence of these nanostructures. Another camp is more cautious. They agree that the nanotubes are present and that their discovery is fascinating, but they argue that their contribution to the overall performance of the blade might be secondary. They maintain that the primary source of the blade's quality is the macroscopic structure, the visible pattern of high carbon cemented in a softer steel matrix. The nanotubes, they suggest, might be more of a scientific curiosity than a key performance enhancer. The debate is ongoing, a testament to how this ancient material continues to challenge and excite modern science. Al-Hadid knows nothing of nanotubes or catalysts. He just knows his craft. He knows the feel of the steel under his hammer. He knows the colors of the fire. He knows the recipe of glass and leaves. Through 1,000 years of accumulated, unwritten wisdom, his craft has evolved to produce something that science is still struggling to fully comprehend. He hands you the blade. You take it, and it feels alive in your hand. It is light, yet powerful. The swirling pattern on its surface seems to draw you in. You now understand that you are not just holding a weapon. You are holding a masterpiece of intuitive science, a product of a global supply chain, a symbol of royal power, and an accidental piece of nanotechnology. It's a paradox in steel, an ancient artifact that is somehow impossibly from the future. You spend the next several months in Al-Hadid's workshop, not as an apprentice in the true sense, but as a privileged observer and assistant. You watch and create other masterpieces, each one a slight variation on the theme, its pattern unique, its balance perfect. You learn to anticipate his needs, to have the right tool ready, to manage the forge's heat. In return, he allows you to learn through osmosis, answering your occasional querying. Single-sentence answers that are more valuable than a whole chapter in a book. One evening, As the work is done and the two of you are sitting in the quiet twilight, you ask him the question that has been burning in your mind. Who will you teach? You ask. Your son? Your apprentices? Al-Hadid looks at his two apprentices who are cleaning the workshop. They are good boys, strong and hardworking, but he shakes his head slightly. They learn to shape the metal, he says. They learn the hammer, but they do not see. They do not see the color in the heart of the flame. They do not feel the steel when it is ready to move. He then looks down at his own calloused hands. My son, his hands are soft. He is a scholar. He reads books. There is no bitterness in his voice, only a quiet, sad resignation. And in that moment, you understand the profound fragility of this entire art form. The secret of Damascus steel is not written down. It doesn't exist in a book or a scroll. It exists entirely within the mind and body of a master smith like Al-Hadid. This is the crucial mainstream historical reason for its eventual disappearance. The knowledge was transmitted orally and through direct observation, from father to son, or from master to a worthy apprentice. This method of knowledge transfer is both incredibly potent and incredibly vulnerable. It allows for the transmission of nuanced, intuitive skills that cannot be captured in words. How do you write down the exact feel of the steel's resistance under the hammer? How do you describe a specific shade of red in a way that someone who has never seen it can understand? You can't. This knowledge has to be lived, but this system has a critical weakness. It only takes one break in the chain for the knowledge to be lost forever. If a master smith has no son, or if his son has no interest in the craft, if he has no apprentice with the right talent or dedication, if he dies suddenly before his knowledge can be passed on, the chain is broken. An entire library of embodied knowledge vanishes from the earth. This leads you to a curious and slightly melancholic piece of trivia about the craft. The smiths were notoriously secretive, and this secrecy was a double-edged sword. It protected their livelihood and the value of their work, but it also ensured the craft's eventual demise. There are tales of rival smiths spying on one another, of apprentices being sworn to secrecy with sacred oaths. One story tells of a smith who would deliberately teach his less favored apprentices incorrect steps, overheating the steel slightly, or using the wrong flux to ensure that they could never replicate his finest work and become his competitors. While this protected his brand, it was also an act of self-sabotage for the craft as a whole. He was actively destroying knowledge to maintain his market position. This intense secrecy and the reliance on oral tradition is at the heart of the historical debate about how, exactly, the art was lost. There isn't one single, universally accepted answer. Instead, it's likely a combination of factors, a perfect storm of circumstances. The breaking of the master-apprentice chain is one of the most important factors. Imagine a generation where, by sheer bad luck, several master smiths in Damascus and Persia are without having found a worthy successor. This would create a sudden, catastrophic loss of knowledge. This great man theory of history, which posits that history can be changed by the actions or inactions of a few key individuals, can be applied here. The loss of a handful of Al-Hadid dads across the region could have been enough to cripple the craft beyond recovery. Other historians argue for a more gradual decline, believing that as generations passed, small details of the process were forgotten or omitted. Perhaps a great-grandson of Al-Hadid would forget the importance of the glassy flux, or his descendant would lose the precise feel for the low-temperature forging. Each generation would produce a slightly inferior version, until the recipe was so degraded that it no longer produced true Damascus steel. This theory suggests a slow erosion of knowledge, rather than a sudden break. Watching Al-Hadid, you see the truth in both arguments. You see how much of his skill is purely in his senses, in his unteachable intuition. If he were gone tomorrow, the two apprentices could likely forge a decent sword, but they would not be able to replicate the masterpiece you saw him create from your woodsy ingot. The subtle magic, the highest level of the art, would be gone. You also see the immense pride he takes in his personal, secret knowledge, and you can understand the temptation to keep that knowledge to himself, to ensure that no one else could ever match his work. The workshop is quiet now. The fires are banked for the night. You look at the finished blades hanging on the wall, their patterns shimmering in the moonlight. They are beautiful, powerful, and perfect, but they are also ephemeral. They are the product of a tradition that is as strong as a master's skill and as fragile as a single human life. You feel a sudden sense of urgency, a desire to record what you've seen, but you know that your words would be a pale imitation of the reality. The true story of Damascus steel is written not with ink but with fire and hammer. Your time in Damascus is drawing to a close, but before you leave, a new sound enters the city. It's the sound of marching feet and the nervous chatter of a populace bracing for conflict. Rumors have been swirling for months, carried by travelers from the north and west. A new wave of crusaders, warriors from the distant lands of Europe, are on the move, intent on carving out kingdoms in the Holy Land. One day you see them for yourself, not in battle but as prisoners being marched through the city streets after a skirmish in the countryside. They are big men, broad-shouldered and pale-skinned, clad in heavy chainmail and cumbersome pot helms. They look strong and formidable, but their equipment seems brutish and unsophisticated compared to the light, efficient armor of the local soldiers. And their swords. You catch a glimpse of one, a straight, heavy, double-edged blade. It looks powerful, like a sharpened club designed for smashing and bludgeoning, but it has none of the grace or artistry of the weapons that come from Al-Hadid's forge. This encounter brings the story of Damascus steel out of the workshop and onto the world stage. The Crusades, that epic clash of civilizations, became the primary conduit through which the legend of Damascus steel entered European consciousness. This is the mainstream historical context for its fame in the West. The European knights, with their relatively simple, forge-welded iron and steel swords, came face to face with these superior blades and were, by all accounts, completely stunned. You hear the stories from the local soldiers who guarded the Crusader prisoners. One soldier with a grin tells you how his commander's saber clove a Crusader's shield, made of thick wooden iron, into without chipping. Another repeats the now familiar tale of a silk handkerchief falling on a blade's edge and being split by its own weight. To the Crusaders, these weapons seemed supernatural, the product of some dark Saracen magic. They returned to Europe with tales of swords that could cut through their own armor, blades that were seemingly unbreakable. The legend was born, amplified by the shock and awe of military defeat. This is where you learn a funny, slightly nerdy tidbit about the culture clash between these two warrior traditions. The European knights, with their heavy armor, relied on powerful, concussive blows. Their swords were designed to smash, break bones, and batter an opponent into submission. The Middle Eastern warriors, often more lightly armored, favored a style of fighting that relied on speed and the slicing cut. Their curved sabers and scimitars were perfectly designed for this. High Damascus steel blade didn't need to be heavy, its incredible sharpness did the work. So when these two technologies met, it was a profound mismatch. A crusader might swing his heavy sword, only to have it parried by a lighter, faster Damascus blade that didn't break or chip. In return, the Damascus blade could find the gaps in the heavy plate mail, or in some cases, allegedly cut through the mail links themselves. It wasn't just a difference in metallurgy, it was a difference in martial philosophy, and the Damascus blade was the perfect tool for its own doctrine. However, the Crusaders' awe and fear also gave rise to a historical debate that persists in pop culture to this day. Just how much better was Damascus steel? Was it truly a super weapon that could effortlessly shear through a European sword as depicted in movies and novels, like Sir Walter Scott's The Talisman, which cemented this image in the Western mind? The scholarly consensus is affirmed now. The idea of one sword cleanly cutting another in half is pure fantasy. A well-made European sword of the era was a formidable weapon, and while it might not have held an edge as well as a Damascus blade, it certainly wouldn't have been as fragile as tin foil. The reality of the advantage was more nuanced. The true superiority of the Damascus blade lay in its combination of properties. It could take a much sharper edge and hold it for longer, meaning it stayed effective throughout a long battle. It was also tougher, less likely to snap on impact than a European sword that had been hardened to a comparable degree, and it was often lighter and better balanced, causing less fatigue for the user. So while it couldn't cut a sword in half, it could reliably disable an opponent, damage their armor, and survive the encounter intact. The advantage was real and significant, but the lights of a caricature is a myth. The debate now is less about if it was better, and more about how much better, and in what specific ways. You look at the captured knights, their faces a mixture of pride, fear, and confusion. They are warriors from a different world, confronted with a technology they cannot comprehend. They see it as sorcery because the gap between their own craft and the craft of a smith like Al-Haddad is so vast. It might as well be. They don't know about woodsy steel from India, or crucible smelting, or low-temperature forging, or carbon nanotubes. They just know that their swords break, and the enemy's swords do not. The clash of these two worlds transforms the Damascus blade from a regional luxury item into an object of international legend. Its reputation is now forged not just in fire, but in blood and in the bewildered stories of defeated enemies. Its value skyrockets. Its mystique deepens. But this very fame, this very demand from a world now aware of its existence, might also be planting the seeds of its own destruction. The pressure to produce more to meet the demand can often lead to a dilution of the quality that created the fame in the first place. Years pass. You are no longer the wide-eyed youth who wandered into the Damascus marketplace. The dust of long roads has settled into the lines on your face. You have seen the birth of a legendary blade, from the crucible in India to the final polish in Al-Haddad's workshop. You have watched the master grow older, his movements a little slower, but no less precise. The world outside the workshop, however, is changing in ways that no amount of skill or tradition can hold back. The most profound change is in the very arteries of the world, the trade routes. The caravan that once felt like a permanent, moving city now seems more vulnerable. Its journeys less certain. You sit with merchants in the tea houses, and their talk is filled with a new anxiety. The great, unifying peace of the Mongol Empire, the Pax Mongol ICA, which had made the overland routes across Asia relatively safe for a time, is crumbling. The vast empire has fractured into warring khanates. Where there was once a single authority to appease, there are now a dozen squabbling warlords, each demanding their own exorbitant taxes, each making the roads more dangerous. A journey that was once merely perilous is now becoming economically unviable. This decay of the Silk Road is a major historical turning point, and it has a direct, devastating impact on our story. The flow of woods, steel ingots from India, the lifeblood of Al-Haddad's craft, begins to slow to a trickle. The caravans that do make it through are smaller, and their goods are astronomically expensive. Al-Haddad now treats his remaining stock of ingots like precious jewels, using them only for the most important commissions. The steady supply that the craft had relied upon for centuries is becoming unreliable. At the same time, another global shift is happening. You hear tales from sailors in the port cities of new sea routes being pioneered by the Europeans. They speak of ships that are larger and more robust than the familiar dhows, capable of mounting cannons and making long, audacious voyages around the coast of Africa. These new maritime powers from Portugal and Spain are beginning to bypass the old middlemen, the Venetian, Genoese, and Arab traders, and are establishing direct trade links with India and the Spice Islands. This is the dawn of the age of sail, and it's a disaster for the old world order. The land-based Silk Road is being rendered obsolete. The wealth and control that cities like Damascus and Cairo had enjoyed for centuries, sitting astride the nexus of global trade, is beginning to evaporate. This isn't a sudden event, but a slow, creeping strangulation. This brings us to a less known, and somewhat ironic, detail of this historical shift. The very crusaders who had been so awestruck by Damascus steel were part of the civilization that would ultimately, though unintentionally, destroy the means of its creation. Their descendants, in their quest for the spices and silks of the East, forged new sea lanes that cut the old supply chain. The demand for the blades in Europe remained high, but the European powers were now in a position to control the source of the raw materials, redirecting them for their own purposes or disrupting the traditional flow. This entire situation fuels one of the central debates about the loss of Damascus steel. Was it a loss of knowledge or a loss of resources? You've already seen how fragile the chain of knowledge was, relying on masters like Al-Haddad. But now you are seeing the other side of the coin. What if the smiths still knew how to make the blades, but they could no longer get the essential ingredient? One school of thought, the supply chain theory, argues that this was the primary cause of death for the craft. The knowledge didn't vanish overnight, but the smiths were slowly starved of the specific high-quality Wuzi steel they needed. They may have tried to adapt, using locally produced steel or inferior Wuzi ingots, but the results would have been disappointing. A master chef can't create a signature dish if they can no longer get the key ingredient. Over time, as the supply dried up completely, the skills to work the special material would have atrophied from lack of use. The other school of thought, which we've touched on before, is the lost knowledge theory. They argue that a true master could have adapted, and that the disruption of the trade routes, while significant, wasn't a fatal blow. They believe the core problem was the failure to pass down the incredibly nuanced forging and heat treating techniques. They point out that even when Wuzi steel was plentiful, the number of smiths who could work it to its full potential was always small. As you sit in the workshop, which is quieter now than it used to be, you feel the weight of both arguments. You watch Al-Haddad inspect a new ingot, bought by a trader at a staggering price. His expression is grim. He shakes his head. The quality is not the same, he mutters. The spark is gone. Is he right? Is the raw material itself changing? Or is he simply an old master, lamenting a golden age that exists only in his memory? It's impossible to say, but the result is the same. The symphony of craft and commerce that created the legendary blades is falling out of tune. The supply chain, once a mighty river, is now a dying stream. The sun is setting on the Silk Road, and with it, the light of the forge is beginning to dim. The world is getting bigger, and yet, for this ancient craft, it is becoming impossibly small. The years continue to spool by, and the problem of the dwindling Wuzi supply becomes a quiet crisis in the smithing community. The stories told by the few merchants who still travel the old routes change. They no longer complain about bandits or taxes, they talk of something far more fundamental. They say that the source itself is running dry. The Wuzi ingots arriving from India are not just rare and more expensive, they are, as Al-Haddad noted, different. The quality is inconsistent. The silvery, crystalline patterns on the rock cakes are less defined. This leads to one of the most compelling and romantic theories for why Damascus steel disappeared, the resource depletion theory. This is a very specific branch of the supply chain argument you've already considered. It doesn't just say the trade routes work, but it posits that the unique raw material, the magical ingredient, simply ceased to exist. According to this theory, the specific mines in the Golconda region of India that produced the special iron ore were finite. This ore, you'll remember, was believed to have a unique chemical fingerprint, a happy geological accident that blessed it with trace amounts of elements like vanadium, molybdenum, chromium, and manganese. These elements acted as catalysts and promoters in the crucible and forging processes, helping to form the distinctive carbide bands and, perhaps, the carbon nanotubes. The ancient smiths didn't know about vanadium, of course. They just knew that the ore from a specific set of mines, the good earth, produced the best yokai cool. For centuries, these mines were the secret wellspring of the entire craft. But mines are not eternal. Like a cup of water, they can be emptied. The theory suggests that sometime around the 17th or 18th century, these specific, mineral-rich veins of ore simply mined out. They were exhausted. The Indian smiths, faced with the loss of their prime ingredient, would have been forced to turn to other, inferior iron ores. They might have used the same crucible process, the same recipe of charcoal and leaves, but the resulting Wuzi ingots would have been fundamentally different. They would have lacked the crucial trace elements that made the original material so special. The spark, as Al-Haddad called it, was literally gone from the earth. This is a powerful, unelegant explanation because it accounts for the slow decline in quality that merchants and smiths were reporting. It was that the Indian smiths forgot how to make Wuzi, they were trying to make it with the wrong stuff, and the smiths in Damascus receiving these new, vanadium-free ingots would have found them impossible to work in the traditional way. Their low-temperature forging techniques, perfected for the unique properties of the original Wuzi, would fail on this new material. The blades would crack, the patterns wouldn't form. They would have been master chefs given flour when the recipe called for sugar. This theory offers a fascinating, almost tragic, little piece of trivia. It suggests that Damascus steel was intrinsically tied to a specific, irreplaceable corner of the planet. It wasn't just a product of human ingenuity, but a partnership between human craft and a unique geological gift. When one partner disappeared, the dance was over. The craft didn't die because of human failure, but because its natural foundation crumbled away. Naturally, this is a topic of heated academic debate. The resource depletion theory is compelling, but it's difficult to prove definitively. The exact locations of the ancient Wood Sea mines are not known with certainty. While modern analysis of surviving blades shows the presence of these trace elements, it's hard to say for sure that only ore from one specific location contained them. Critics of this theory argue that it places too much emphasis on a magic ingredient and not enough on the magic recipe. They contend that skilled smiths in both India and Persia could have adapted to different ores, and that the loss of the craft was more likely due to the socio-economic factors. We've already discussed the breakdown of trade routes and the loss of generational knowledge. They believe that the mine and rice story is a convenient and overly simplistic explanation for a much more complex historical process. Some even argue that the focus on trace elements is a modern bias, as we look for chemical explanations, while the ancient smiths themselves would have focused more on the process. You, living through this era, can see evidence for both sides. You see Al-Haddad's frustration with the new, inferior ingots, which supports the resource depletion theory. He holds up two ingots, one from his old stock, one newly arrived. Even to your trained eye, the difference in the surface texture is clear. The old one has a fine, intricate web of crystals. The new one looks muddy and coarse in comparison. But you also see the other side. Al-Haddad is old now. His hands tremble slightly. His two original apprentices have long since left to open their own, less prestigious shops where they work with more common steels. The new boys in the workshop are clumsy and lack the deep, intuitive focus of their master. The chain of knowledge is visibly weakening before your eyes. Perhaps the truth isn't an either-or answer. Perhaps it was a cascade of failures. The mines began to yield poorer ore at the exact same time that the trade routes were becoming precarious, and at the same time that the old masters were struggling to find worthy successors. It wasn't one leak that sank the ship, it was a dozen leaks springing at once. The treasure of knowledge and the treasure in the earth were both being lost at the same time. A slow, inevitable slide into oblivion. The workshop is quieter than it has ever been. The rhythmic ping-ping-ping of the hammer is a rare sound now. Al-Haddad is an old man, his broad shoulders stooped, his powerful arms thinned with age. He spends most of his days sitting by the forge, not working, but simply watching the coals as if they hold the memories of 1,000 blades. The last of his precious, high-quality Wuji ingots was used years ago on a commission for Apollo's ceremonial sword. Now, he occasionally works on lesser steels, but his heart isn't in it. The fire in him seems to be dimming with the fire of his forge. You are no longer a visitor. You are his companion, his confidant, the keeper of his stories. You see firsthand the final, tragic chapter of this living library of knowledge. The problem is no longer a lack of resources or a broken supply chain. The problem is time itself. The last of the great masters are dying out, and they are taking their secrets with them. This is the most human and poignant part of the story, a historical reality that transcends metallurgy. All complex, unwritten craft traditions face this ultimate crisis, the mortality of their practitioners. The knowledge that Al-Haddad holds, the precise color of the forging heat, the feel of the steel's plasticity, the sound of a perfect quench, is encoded in his nervous system, a lifetime of sensory data. It is not transferable in any simple way. You watch him try to explain a fine point to a new young apprentice. He is trying to describe the exact moment to pull the blade from the fire for the quench. It must have a thirst, he says, his voice a dry rasp. You must feel its thirst for the oil. The apprentice just stares back, his face a mask of incompression. Aaron, how can steel be thirsty? The boy understands the mechanics. Heat the metal, plunge it in oil. But he cannot grasp the poetry, the deep, empathetic connection to the material. That is the hallmark of a true master. Al-Haddad gives up with a sigh of frustration. The language of his senses has no dictionary. This scene encapsulates a strange and fascinating detail about the transmission of master-level skills. Sometimes the master himself doesn't fully, consciously know how he does what he does. His knowledge is so internalized, so embodied that he can't articulate it. When asked to explain, he might resort to metaphor, the steel's thirst, or myth, because the literal scientific language doesn't exist for him. This is why a skilled practitioner is not always a good teacher. The very thing that makes them a genius, their intuitive, unconscious competence, can also make it impossible for them to download that competence into a student. The world is changing around the workshop. A new technology is on the rise. Firearms. The crack of an early musket is beginning to be heard on the battlefields. While these early guns are slow, inaccurate, and unreliable, they represent a fundamental shift in warfare. A peasant with a few weeks of training can now defeat a knight with a lifetime of swordsmanship. Armor is becoming less effective, and with it, the demand for swords of the absolute highest quality begins to wane. The age of the blade is slowly giving way to the age of gunpowder. This technological shift is another key factor in the historical debate over the death of Damascus steel. Was it a victim of its own success in a world that no longer needed it? Proponents of this socio-economic theory argue that the craft didn't just disappear, it became irrelevant. Why would a king or a general spend a fortune and wait years to commission a perfect sword when he could equip a whole company of musketeers for the same price? The demand shifted from high-quality, artisanal weapons to mass-produced, functional firearms. The patronage that had supported masters like Al-Hadid for centuries began to dry up. The brilliant artists of the forge were being replaced by the efficient mechanics of the arsenal. It's a classic story of disruptive innovation. The finest horse-drawn carriage builder in the world was still put out of business by the first affordable automobile. Other historians argue this point is overstated, at least for the initial period of decline. They contend that while firearms were on the rise, the sword remained a vital sidearm and a potent symbol of status for centuries. A wealthy officer would still want a fine blade at his hip, even if his primary weapon was a pistol. They believe the decline in demand wasn't sharp enough on its own to kill the craft entirely, and that the core of the problem remains the dual loss of materials and knowledge. You see the truth of this as a new type of customer comes to the workshop. He is not a warrior prince or a grizzled general. He is a wealthy merchant who wants a Damascus dagger for his collection. He is buying the name, the legend. He cannot tell the difference between a true Wootsie blade and a lesser piece of pattern-welded steel. The connoisseurship is dying along with the craft. One day, you learn that another of the city's old master smiths has passed away. He was a rival of Al-Hadid's, a man he respected and competed with for decades. Al-Hadid sits in silence for a long time. It's another light extinguished, another library burned to the ground. He is one of the last. He is an island, and the sea is rising around him. The final smiths are like the last speakers of a dying language. They can talk to each other, but the world around them has forgotten how to listen. The tragedy is not just that a man is dying, but that a universe of knowledge is dying with him. The workshop, once a vibrant heart of creation, is becoming a museum of a lost art, and its curator is the last living exhibit. The day you have long dreaded finally arrives. Al-Hadid passes away peacefully in his sleep. His death is quiet, but the silence it leaves behind is deafening. The workshop, which had been the center of your world for so long, feels hollow, its soul extinguished. The forge is cold. The hammers lie on their racks, inert and voiceless. The great anvil, worn smooth by generations of labor, stands like a tombstone in the center of the room. His son, the scholar, arrives to settle his father's affairs. He is a kind, educated man, but he looks around the dusty, soot-stained workshop with a sense of bewildered detachment. This was his father's world, but it is alien to him. He sees tools, not extensions of a master's hands. He sees a pile of charcoal, not the controlled heart of a blade's creation. He decides to sell the workshop and its contents. The tools are sold for scrap metal. The anvil is bought by a blacksmith who makes horseshoes. The legacy is dismantled and scattered. You walk through the city's markets, and for the first time, you see the full extent of the loss. The art is not just dying, it is officially dead. By the time you find yourself in the mid-18th century, true Damascus steel, forged from Indian Wootsie, is no longer being produced. Anywhere, the chain of knowledge, the supply of materials, the culture of patronage, all the pillars supporting the craft have crumbled. What remains is the legend, and a burgeoning market for fakes and imitations. This is the historical consensus somewhere between 1750 and 1800. The last true Damascus blade was forged. The art was officially lost to the world. What had been a continuous tradition for over a millennium had vanished in the space of just a few generations. You see wordsmiths in the market who claim to sell Damascus blades. But you, with your trained eye, can see they are frauds. The most common imitation is a technique you now recognize as pattern welding, or what some call mechanical Damascus. This is an ancient technique in its own right, where a smith takes bars of different types of iron and steel, stacks them together, welds them into a single billet, and then twists and folds the billet repeatedly. When ground, polished, and etched, this process reveals a wavy, linear pattern. It can be beautiful, but it's not the same. The pattern on these blades is purely aesthetic and macroscopic. It's a collage, a sandwich of different metals. It does not have the microscopic, dendritic, crystalline structure of true Wuzi steel. It looks like wood grain, whereas true Damascus steel looks like flowing water or smoke. The properties are different too. A well-made pattern-welded blade can be very good, but it doesn't possess the unique combination of super hardness and flexibility that came from the crucible process. This proliferation of fakes leads to a strange and ironic piece of historical trivia. The very fame of Damascus steel contributed to the confusion that allowed the real thing to die unnoticed. As the supply of genuine Wuzi blades dwindled, these pattern-welded imitations filled the void. To the average buyer, even a wealthy one, the patterned surface was all that mattered. They bought the look of Damascus steel, unaware that the underlying technology was completely different. The brand name had become detached from the original product. This made it even harder for the few remaining true masters to compete, as they were being undercut by smiths producing cheaper, flashier, but inferior imitations. This situation fuels a final, lingering historical debate: was the art truly lost, or did it just evolve into something else? A small minority of historians and smiths might argue that the tradition didn't die, but simply transformed. They would say that pattern welding became the new Damascus steel, and that this was a natural evolution of the craft in response to new materials and economic realities. However, the overwhelming majority of historians, metallurgists, and craftsmen disagree. They argue that this is like saying alchemy evolved into modern chemistry. While one followed the other, they are fundamentally different disciplines with different materials, processes, and results. True Damascus steel was a unique technology based on crucible cast, high-carbon, high-purity tech to its steel. Pattern welding is a forging technique applied to various laminated steels. To call them the same thing is to misunderstand what made the original so special. The art was not transformed, it was replaced by a different, less sophisticated though still skillful art form that borrowed its name. You wander through the city, which is also changing. The old world is fading. The caravanserais are quieter, the old trade families less powerful. The stories of legendary blades are now just that, stories told by old men, about a time that is slipping into myth. You can go to a dozen weapon dealers and not find a single person who has ever held a genuine Wuzi steel blade in their hands. They know the name, the legend, but they have no connection to the physical reality. The loss feels profound, like a color has vanished from the spectrum. It wasn't just a product that was lost, but a whole ecosystem of knowledge, a way of seeing and interacting with the material world. The intuitive science of al-Hadid, passed down through countless generations, has evaporated into thin air. The world has forgotten how to speak the language of fire and steel. The library is not just closed, it has been razed to the ground, and no one is left who remembers the books it once held. The art is forgotten, and a great silence settles over the forges of Damascus. You find yourself drifting north and west away from the lands where the memory of the great blades is fading into folklore. The world is accelerating, hurtling into a new century, the 19th. It's an age of steam, iron, and revolutionary new ideas. You arrive in London, a city choked with coal smoke of a different kind, the smoke of industry. The rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer has been replaced by the thunderous, overwhelming roar of factories. Science, not tradition, is the new god, And it is here, in the heart of this new scientific world, that the ghost of Damascus steel reappears, not as a weapon, but as a scientific puzzle. The blades themselves, now priceless antiques, sit in the collections of wealthy gentlemen and in the glass cases of burgeoning museums, and the top scientific minds of the day are utterly captivated by them. They can see the result, a blade that is impossibly sharp and strong with a beautiful, inexplicable pattern, but as men of science, they cannot abide a mystery. They must understand how. You find yourself a quiet observer in the lecture hall of the Royal Institution. A man with an intense, brilliant gaze is addressing a crowd of England's finest scientists. His name is Michael Faraday. Yes, that Michael Faraday, the titan of physics, the man who will lay the groundwork for electricity and magnetism. But before he revolutionized the world with his work on electromagnetism, Faraday was obsessed with metallurgy, and his great obsession was cracking the code of Damascus steel. This is the next chapter in our story, a well-documented historical fact. The attempt to scientifically reverse-engineer Damascus steel became a passion project for some of the greatest scientists of the 19th century. Faraday, along with his contemporary James Sto. Conducted one of the most famous series of experiments. They acquired samples of Wood's steel, some of the last available trickling into Europe, and subjected them to rigorous chemical analysis. They were determined to solve the puzzle with the tools of modern science. Faraday believed the secret lay in the steel's composition. He correctly identified that it was a high-carbon steel, but he hypothesized that its unique properties came from the addition of other elements. He embarked on a quest to create super steels by intentionally alloying iron with various metals. He tried adding platinum. He tried rhodium. He even tried silver. He was, in essence, trying to recreate the magic ingredient from the Indian ore, but through a deliberate, scientific process of addition rather than a happy geological accident. This leads to a wonderful, quirky piece of trivia from the history of science. Faraday produced hundreds of small samples of these experimental alloys. Most of them were failures. They didn't replicate the properties or the pattern of true Wood. He carefully labeled these little blocks of metal and stored them in a box. 4 years after his death, this box of Faraday's steels was just a forgotten curiosity in the archives of the Royal Institution. No one quite knew what to do with them. It was a footnote in the career of a great man. But these little blocks represent a noble failure, the first systematic, scientific attempt to understand and recreate this legendary material. You can imagine the scene: Faraday, the brilliant experimentalist in his laboratory, a place of precise measurements, chemical beakers, and electric batteries. He is a world away from Al-Hadid's dusty, intuitive workshop. He is applying the scientific method, hypothesis, experiment, observation, conclusion. And yet, he fails. Why? This is the central point of a fascinating historical debate. Why did the best scientific mind of the age, equipped with tools and a theoretical framework that Al-Hadid could never dream of, fail to reproduce what the ancient myths did with fire and a hammer? One side of the argument is that Faraday was on the right track but was missing key pieces of the puzzle. He focused almost entirely on the composition, the chemical ingredients, and paid less attention to the process, the thermoconnectional treatment. He didn't know about the crucial need for low-temperature forging. He didn't know about the slow, controlled cooling in the crucible. He could have had a perfect chemical match to Wood's steel, but if he heated it and hammered it like conventional steel, he would have destroyed the very microscopic structure he was trying to create. He was a chemist trying to solve a problem that was equal parts chemistry, physics, and materials science. The other side of the argument is that his failure highlights the limitations of the science of his day. Metallurgy was still in its infancy. There were no electron microscopes to see the carbide structures or the nanotubes. There were no phase diagrams to understand the complex relationship between carbon content, temperature, and crystalline structure. Faraday was working in the dark like a man trying to repair a watch with a blacksmith's hammer. As one latest scientist put it, the mystery of Damascus steel was simply too sophisticated for the science of the 19th century to solve. You see the frustration in the great scientist's eyes. He can analyze, he can theorize, he can experiment, but he cannot recreate the living, breathing pattern of the jawhar. He can make steel that is hard, or steel that is strong, but he cannot make a steel that is both, in the same way with the same beauty. The ancient art resists the modern inquiry. The noble failure of Faraday and others served only to deepen the mystique of Damascus steel. It proved that it wasn't a simple trick. It was a profound piece of craftsmanship that science, for all its power, could not yet decipher. The secret, lost by the artisans who created it, was now being guarded by the material itself, refusing to reveal its inner workings to the prying eyes of a new, more powerful age. The forge had fallen silent, and now the laboratory, too, was dumb. The blade's legend only grew. The 19th century gives way to the 20th. The world is utterly transformed. You are in an era of automobiles, of soaring skyscrapers, of 2 world wars that have remade the global map. The sword, once the queen of the battlefield, is now little more than a ceremonial object, a piece of military dress uniform. And yet, the ghost of Damascus steel persists. The puzzle left unsolved by Faraday still fascinates a new generation of craftsmen and engineers. In this new industrial landscape, the desire for a patterned steel, for that look of the legendary blades, has not vanished. In fact, it has found a new home, the world of high-end custom knife making. Craftsmen, particularly in America, begin to resurrect and refine the old technique of pattern welding that you saw emerging as the original art died out, and they give it a familiar, marketable name, Damascus steel. You find yourself in a modern workshop. It's clean, well lit, and filled with power tools. There's the roar of a gas-powered forge, the scream of a belt grinder, the whine of a drill press. A knife maker wearing safety glasses and a leather apron is working on a billet of steel. He takes 2 different types of modern, high-quality steel, one high in nickel, which will etch bright and silvery, and one a plain high-carbon steel, which will etch dark gray or black. He stacks them in alternating layers, heats them in his forge until they are glowing yellow-white, and welds them together with the crushing force of a hydraulic press. This is the birth of the modern Damascus that most people are familiar with today. It's a direct descendant of the old pattern welding techniques, but supercharged with modern technology and metallurgy. The smith will then twist, fold, and re-weld this billet dozens, even hundreds of times, to create incredibly complex and beautiful patterns, raindrop ladder mosaic. The results are stunning works of art. This is the mainstream understanding of what Damascus steel means in the contemporary world. If you buy a Damascus kitchen knife or a custom hunting knife today, this is what you are getting: a beautifully patterned, laminated steel made from forge welding different modern alloys together. It is a highly skilled craft that produces strong, functional, and gorgeous blades. But, and this is the crucial point, it is not, by any stretch of the imagination, the same thing as the ancient wood-based steel. This distinction is the source of a lot of confusion and a fair bit of grumpy, purist trivia. Knife forums and blade smithing communities are full of debates about the proper terminology. A purist will tell you, quite forcefully, that modern Damascus should always be called pattern-welded steel. They argue that using the name Damascus is historically inaccurate and misleading, as it co-opts the name of a lost, superior technology. It's like calling a high-quality print of the Mona Lisa. It might look similar from a distance, but it's fundamentally not the same object. This leads to the ongoing, and often heated, academic and artisan debate: is it a lie to call modern pattern-welded steel Damascus? The pragmatic argument is that the term Damascus steel has simply evolved. Language changes, and for over a century the name has been popularly associated with patterned steel of any kind. They argue that as long as the seller is honest about the manufacturing process, that it's pattern-welded from modern steels, then using the famous name is just good marketing. It connects a modern craft to a historical legend. The purest argument, however, is that this erodes history and understanding. By calling the modern material Damascus, we flatten the story and forget what made the original so unique. We forget about the Indian crucible process, the Wootz e-ingots, the low-temperature forging, and the microscopic carbide structures. They fear that the impostor has become so common that it has erased the memory of the king. You can appreciate both sides. The modern knife maker is not trying to deceive anyone. He is a master of his own complex craft, proud of the beautiful and functional art he creates. He is part of a living tradition. But you, having seen our Dad's workshop, feel a pang of loss. You know what has been forgotten. You know that the modern blade, for all its beauty, lacks the ghost in the machine. Its pattern is a deliberate construction, not the visible soul of a unique material. You see these modern Damascus knives everywhere, from high-end cutlery shops to online stores. They are popular, beautiful, and a testament to the enduring appeal of a patterned blade. But they are also, in a way, a monument to a mystery. Their very existence is an acknowledgement of a lost art that modern craftsmen have chosen to honor through imitation rather than replication. They are beautiful, high-quality Maopai-Hor knockoffs. They carry the name of the legend, but not its true substance. The modern world has successfully replicated the look, but the secret of the ancient substance remains elusive. The factories and power tools can create patterns of stunning complexity, but they cannot recreate the quiet alchemy of the Indian crucible or the intuitive genius of the Damascus fort. The mystery has survived the Industrial Revolution, and it will take a new level of scientific inquiry to finally pull back the last veil. Your journey now takes you to a place that would seem like pure magic to all had it, a place even Michael Faraday could not have imagined. You are in a modern university's materials science laboratory. The air doesn't smell of coal smoke and hot metal, it smells of clean air conditioning and faint ozone. There are no anvils or hammers. Instead, the room is filled with silent humming machines, their surfaces covered in screens displaying complex graphs and data. This is the new forge. On a sterile tray sits a small, unassuming fragment of metal. It's a piece of a genuine, antique Damascus blade, broken long ago, now a priceless artifact for study. A researcher in a white lab coat carefully mounts this tiny fragment onto a stub and places it inside the chamber of a massive, complex machine. It's a scanning electron microscope, SEM. This is the moment where modern science finally begins to catch up to the ancient craft. For the first time, humanity is able to see the world that all had it could only feel. The SEM fires a beam of electrons at the sample, creating a massively magnified image on a computer screen. And what appears on that screen is the truth, the microscopic landscape that gives Damascus steel its power. You watch, mesmerized as the image resolves. There they are, the structures you've heard so much about. You see long, winding, bright white bands snaking through a darker gray background. These are the networks of cemented iron carbide, the structures that were born in the Indian crucible and elongated in the Damascus forge. The microscope reveals them in stunning detail. You can see how they are clustered, how they flow, how they form the Rosen ladder patterns on a scale 1,000 times smaller than the naked eye can see. This is the mainstream scientific confirmation of the blade's composite nature. The researcher zooms in further, pushing the limits of the machine. The image becomes a surreal, abstract landscape. And there, embedded within the white bands of cemented the researcher points out faint, wispy lines. These are the fabled carbon nanotubes, the accidental nanotechnology created by the ancient myths. The SCM confirms their existence, a stunning revelation that bridges 1,000 years of technological history. This powerful new vision, however, doesn't end the debate, it refines it. Looking at the screen, you are at the heart of the modern scientific argument about Damascus steel. The question is no longer if these structures exist, but how they work together. One scientist might point to the screen and say, "Look at the density of those carbide bands. That is the key. The forging process aligned them perfectly along the cutting edge. That's why it's so sharp." Another might zoom in on the nanotubes and argue, "No, the real secret is here. These nanotubes are reinforcing the carbides, preventing them from becoming brittle. They are the reason the edge doesn't chip." A third might point to the boundary layer between the bright carbides and the dark steel matrix. It's all about this interface, you might say. The way they are bonded together allows stress to be distributed without causing a fracture. The genius is in the bond, not the individual components. They are all looking at the same image, the same piece of objective truth, but they are interpreting it through the lens of their own specialties. The metallurgist sees a feat of heat treatment. The nanotechnologist sees a miracle of materials science. The mechanical engineer sees a perfectly optimized stress-bearing structure. The truth, you realize, is probably a symphony of all three. This is where you encounter a really cool, niche piece of information about modern attempts at replication. One of the leading researchers in the field, a man named John Verhoeven, working with a master bladesmith named Alpendre, spent years trying to crack the code. They used electron microscopes, chemical analysis, and countless experimental forgings. They discovered the critical role of the trace element impurities like vanadium from the ore, not as an alloying agent, but as carbide formers. These impurities acted like seeds, telling the carbides where and how to precipitate during the slow cooling in the crucible. Their work, combining rigorous science with hands-on craftsmanship, managed to produce blades that came closer than anyone before to replicating the look and structure of true Wootz e Damascus. Their success was a monumental leap forward, yet even they admitted their results were not perfect replicas. This highlights the central, stubborn academic debate, even with all our modern knowledge. Is it possible to perfectly replicate the ancient art? The Verhoeven-penned ray research suggests we can get very, very close by controlling the chemical composition and the forging process. They proved that the lost art was not magic, but a complex, reproducible science. However, other researchers argue that true replication might be impossible because we can triplicate the exact starting conditions. We don't have the original ore from the exhausted Indian mines. We don't know the exact composition of the clay used for the crucibles. We don't know the type of wood used for the charcoal, which could have imparted its own unique trace elements. They argue that the ancient process was a holistic recipe where every single ingredient mattered. Changing even one small variable, the ore, the clay, the leaves, could change the final outcome in subtle ways. The electron microscope gives you the what with breathtaking clarity. It shows you the intricate, beautiful, and fantastically complex inner world of the steel. But it cannot fully answer the how. It can't capture the intuitive feel of Al-Hadid's hammer, the scent of the sycamore leaves in the flux, or the specific mineral content of a handful of earth dug from a hillside in India 1,000 years ago. The microscope reveals the secrets of the blade's structure, but it can't reveal the full story of its soul. It has brought you closer to the truth than ever before, but a final, tantalizing veil remains. The journey has taken you from the legends of the marketplace to the sterile, precise world of the modern laboratory. You've seen the theories, you've seen the microscopic evidence. The question that hangs in the air, humming with the quiet energy of the lab's machines, is a practical one. If we know so much now, can we finally do it? Can we make true Damascus steel again? You move from the world of analysis to the world of creation. You find yourself in the workshop of a modern master bladesmith, a spiritual successor to Al-Hadid, but one armed with the knowledge gleaned from the electron microscope. This smith isn't just an artist, he's a scholar and an experimental scientist. His workshop is a hybrid space with a roaring forge and a heavy anvil on one side, and a shelf of chemistry textbooks and metallurgical journals on the other. He is attempting the grand challenge of perfect replication. He starts not with an unknown ore, but with a custom-made batch of steel, smelted to his exact specifications. He has commissioned a foundry to create a steel alloy that chemically matches the composition of an ancient Wootz e-ingot, right down to the trace amounts of vanadium and molybdenum, the impurities that are now known to be essential. This is a critical piece of the modern replication process. It begins with a deliberate, scientific recreation of the raw material. He doesn't use a clay pot sealed with mud. He uses a high-tech graphite crucible, sealed in an inert gas furnace where he can control the temperature and atmosphere with digital precision. He follows the slow cooling protocols discovered by researchers like Verhoeven, allowing the molten, high-carbon steel to solidify over many hours, giving the carbide structures the time they need to precipitate and form their intricate, dendritic patterns. When he breaks open the crucible, the ingot that emerges is a stunning success. It has the right weight, the right feel, and its surface is covered in the fine, feathery patterns that signal a good Wootz-like structure. He has recreated the cake. Now comes the forging. He doesn't rely solely on the color of the glowing metal. He uses a pyrometer, a digital thermometer for measuring high temperatures, to ensure he stays within that narrow critical window for low-temperature forging. He knows that if he goes above about 850 degrees Celsius, the pattern will be lost forever. He hammers with skill and patience, his movements echoing Al-Hadid's, but his process is constantly checked and verified by modern tools. The result is a blade that is, by all scientific measures, a near-perfect replica. When he grinds, polishes, and etches it, the pattern that emerges is not the linear look of pattern welding, but the smoky, swirling, watery pattern of true WOTZ. The jawhar lives again. He has done it. He has resurrected the lost art. But here, in this moment of triumph, you discover the final, frustrating and subtle truth. It's a success, but a qualified one. This is the quirky, almost philosophical sticking point for many in the blade smithing world. The modern smith has made a Damascus blade, but has he made the Damascus blade? The process was incredibly difficult, time-consuming, and astronomically expensive. The custom-made steel, the specialized furnace, the laboratory-grade controls, this is not a scalable or practical method. The resulting blade, while a masterpiece, might cost tens of thousands of dollars to produce. This isn't a resurrected craft, it's a heroic, one-off scientific experiment. This is a common situation in experimental archaeology, where we can prove how something could have been done. But we can't replicate the economic and social conditions that made it practical in its own time. This leads to the final, lingering academic debate. Is a perfect replica that is made with modern tools and scientific knowledge truly the same as an original made with intuitive craft and traditional tools? The product-focused argument says yes. If the final blade has the same chemical composition, the same microscopic structure, and the same physical properties, then it is the same thing. The method of production is irrelevant. The destination is all that matters, not how you got there. A molecule of water is a molecule of water, whether it came from a glacier or was synthesized in a lab. The process-focused argument says no. The soul of the object, they argue, is inextricably linked to the process of its creation. The ancient blade was the result of 1,000 years of accumulated wisdom, of a deep connection between a craftsman and his materials, of a whole socio-economic ecosystem. The modern replica is the product of the scientific method of deconstruction and reconstruction. It may have the same body, but it lacks the same spirit. It's a perfect photograph of a living person. It captures the image but not the life. You hold the modern replica in one hand and imagine an original, forged by Al-Hadid in the other. They look and feel identical. The patterns are equally beautiful. They are both incredibly sharp and strong. Yet you know they are different. One was born of a mystery, the other was born of the solving of that mystery. The quest to perfectly replicate Damascus steel has been a monumental success in a scientific sense. It has taught us more about materials science, nanotechnology, and the genius of ancient artisans than we ever imagined. But it has also taught us a lesson in humility. It has shown us that even when we can reverse engineer a masterpiece, we cannot reverse engineer the world that created it. We can bring the blade back to life, but we cannot bring back the age of the blade. The recipe has been found, but the world has lost its taste for the dish. The beautiful, functional, impossibly expensive modern replica is a testament not just to a lost art, but to a lost world. You stand at the crossroads of past and present, holding the ghost of an ancient blade in one hand and its modern, scientifically engineered twin in the other. The journey has been immense, from the dusty markets of Damascus to the sterile, clean rooms of modern labs. You have uncovered so many secrets. You understand the crucible process, the low-temperature forging, the glassy flux, the acid etch, and even the hidden world of carbon nanotubes. The mystery, it seems, has been solved. But as you stand there, a final, more profound question begins to settle in your mind. What was it, really, that was lost? Was it a piece of science, or was it a form of art? This is the ultimate philosophical debate that underpins the entire story of Damascus steel. It's a question about the very nature of knowledge and creation. If you lean towards the science argument, you see the story as a history of an advanced, empirical materials science. The Indian smiths who developed the Wuzi crucible were early chemical engineers, manipulating temperature and ingredients to achieve a specific chemical composition and crystalline structure. Al-Hadid and his predecessors were brilliant metallurgists and physicists, applying precise thermoconectional processing to a difficult, high-carbon alloy. Their methods were not written down in the language of science we use today, but they were science nonetheless, a science based on observation, experimentation, and generations of peer review. From this perspective, the loss of Damascus steel was a technological regression. A body of scientific knowledge was forgotten, a set of repeatable procedures lost to time. The subsequent rediscovery, through the work of Faraday, Verhoeven, and others, is a triumph of the modern scientific method. We deconstructed the problem, analyzed its components, and developed a new, more precise methodology to achieve the same result. The new blade, the modern replica, is therefore the rightful heir to the old one, a testament to science's ability to recover and even improve upon lost knowledge. The craft was lost, but the science has been reclaimed. But then you look at it from the other side, the art perspective. From this angle, Al-Hadid was not a scientist in a lab coat. He was an artist. His medium was not paint or clay, but fire and steel. His knowledge was not a set of formulas and procedures, but a deep, intuitive feel for his material. He didn't measure the temperature with a pyrometer, he saw it in the thirst of the steel. He didn't analyze the carbon content, he knew it by the ring of the ingot when he tapped it with his hammer. This is a different kind of knowledge altogether. It's an artistic sensibility, a conversation between the maker and the material. The process was a performance, a dance. The final blade wasn't just an engineered product, it was an expression of the smith's mastery, his personal touch. The unique, unrepeatable pattern on every blade was like a signature. This is a fascinating bit of trivia. No, the true Damascus blades are exactly alike. The chaotic, fluid nature of the crystallization process ensured that every single one was a unique creation, a one-of-a-kind piece of art. If you see it this way, the loss of Damascus steel was the extinction of an art form. It wasn't just a recipe that was lost, but a whole way of being and creating. And from this perspective, the modern replica, for all its scientific perfection, misses the point. It is a perfect copy, but it lacks the artist's hand. It is technically brilliant, but spiritually empty. It's the difference between a perfectly programmed player piano and a live concert by a master pianist. One is a flawless execution of a code, the other is a living, breathing interpretation. The debate of art versus science here is not just semantics. It gets to the heart of what we value in human creation. Do we value the result or the journey? The predictable perfection of a machine or the flawed, unique beauty of a human hand? Perhaps the truest answer is that the line between the two is blurry. The ancient Smiths were both artists and scientists. They were practicing a science so advanced it looked like art, and an art so disciplined it functioned like science. The genius of Damascus steel was that it was impossible to separate the two. The beauty of the pattern was inseparable from the blade's performance. The form and the function were one and the same. What was lost then was not just one or the other. It was the union of the two. We now have the science of steel, and we have the art of bladesmithing, but they are separate disciplines. A material scientist can tell you why the steel works, and a master smith can make a beautiful object, but the ancient craftsman was the rare individual who embodied both roles at once. You look from the ancient blade to the modern one. One represents a world where art and science were unified in the hands of a master. The other represents a world where they have been separated, analyzed, and put back together. The secret has been found, but in the process of finding it, we have perhaps confirmed that the original magic, that perfect unconscious synthesis of knowledge and intuition, is the one thing we can never truly replicate. Your long journey is coming to an end. You have followed the ghost of this legendary metal across centuries and continents. You've stood in the smoky workshops of the past and the gleaming laboratories of the present. You heard the stories, learned the science, and pondered the philosophy. Now there is only one place left to go. You find yourself in a great museum, a quiet, hushed cathedral of history. You walk through halls filled with the treasures of bygone eras, pottery, jewelry, textiles, armor, and then you see it, standing alone in a glass case, spotlit with a soft, reverent light. It's a scimitar from the Mamluk Sultanate, forged in the 15th century. It is a perfect, pristine example of true Damascus steel. This is the final resting place of the legend. The blades that were once the terror of the battlefield, the pride of kings, and the obsession of scientists are now museum artifacts. They have been removed from the world of function and placed forever in the realm of contemplation. This is the ultimate fate of all great, obsolete technologies. They transition from tools to treasures, from objects of use to objects of art. You press your hands against the cool glass, getting as close as you can. The blade's curve is impossibly graceful. The hilt is a masterpiece of gold and ivory. But your eyes are drawn, as always, to the steel itself. Under the carefully controlled museum lighting, the jawhar is hypnotic. The watery pattern seems to shift and move as you change your viewing angle. It looks dark, deep, and 1,000 years old. It is a storm trapped in steel, a river frozen in time. You think back to the very beginning of your journey, the soldier in the marketplace boasting about his blade. You finally understand the depth of his pride. You think of the Indian smiths, patiently cooking their metal cakes, listening for the right sound. You think of Al-Haddad, his face illuminated by the cherry-red glow of the forge, his hammer falling in a patient, persuasive rhythm. You think of Faraday, puzzling over his failed alloys. You think of the modern scientists staring in wonder at their electron microscope screens. This single object in front of you is the culmination of all those stories. It contains all of that history within its patterned surface. Here in the quiet of the museum, you stumble upon one last poignant piece of trivia. Many of the finest surviving Damascus blades have names. They aren't just catalog numbers, they are known by historical titles, often named after a famous owner or a legendary battle. They are treated like individuals with their own histories, their own personalities. This personification of the blades speaks to the profound impact they had on the human imagination. They were never just objects, they were companions, partners in life and death. As you stand there, a final subtle question drifts into your mind, a debate that can never truly be settled. What is the true legacy of Damascus steel? Is it in the handful of surviving blades, these beautiful relics behind glass? Is it in the scientific papers that have deciphered its secrets? Or is it in the ongoing craft of modern pattern welding? The imposture that carries the name and keeps the aesthetic alive for a new generation. There is no single right answer. The legacy is all of these things. It's a story with multiple endings, multiple epilogues. For the historian, it's a lesson in the fragility of knowledge and the complex interplay of craft, trade, and technology. For the scientist, it's a humbling reminder that ingenuity is not the sole province of the modern age, a source of inspiration for future materials. For the artist and the craftsman, it's a benchmark of beauty and skill, a ghost to be chased, a legend that fuels their own creative fires. You look at the blade one last time. It offers no more answers. It simply is. It is a testament to a time when a craftsman could take a lump of earth from India, pass it through the fires of a Damascus forge, and create a masterpiece that would mystify the world for 1,000 years. It is a symbol of a lost art, but also a symbol of the unending human quest to understand, to create, and to achieve perfection. The blade is silent in its glass case, but its story, you now know, will echo forever. It is beautiful, it is mysterious, and it is finally at peace. And so, the story of the lost steel comes to a close. The fires of the forge have cooled, and the hammers are now silent. The journey that began with a whisper in a bustling market has led us down through the winding corridors of time, to the very heart of a mystery made of fire and iron. You felt the patient heat of the forge, and the cool, quiet reverence of the museum. You can feel the weight of that knowledge now, a soft, heavy blanket. The rhythmic tapping of Al-Haddad's hammer becomes a distant, gentle beat, slowing down, matching the rhythm of your own slow, steady breathing. The swirling, watery patterns of the jawhar begin to merge with the soft, flowing patterns that appear behind your closed eyes. The lines blur between waking and dreaming, between the story and the storyteller. You are drifting now on a slow, quiet river of your own, the edges of the world softening into a gentle haze. There are no more questions to be asked, no more secrets to uncover. There is only the quiet and the dark, and the gentle pull of sleep. The journey is over. It is time to rest. The end of the article. Good night.